5:30 p.m. Tuesday, March 8th. This is the regular meeting of the Fargo Board of Education. Welcome, everyone. Is there a motion for approval of the agenda? Jim?
I move adoption of the agenda with the addition of the HR addendum to be added to item 6C on our consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by, who was it? Sorry. Dr. Newman. Okay. Jennifer?
Thank you. Yes, I would like to request that we move items H and I from consent agenda down to business as part of that approval. Thank you.
Is that all right with the second and the motion being made? I don't see any opposition. Okay, all in favor signify by saying yes. Yes. Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. We have an agenda approved, and we'll move those two items then after C, under business. All right, then we get to have a performance this evening. Some students from South High School are joining us. I think this is the first performance that we have had in the boardroom as board members, so this is very exciting. Thank you for being here. And I understand Ruby Lenhart, a student from South High, will be making the introductions of your group this evening. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. We will be performing Rise My Soul, arranged by Susan LaBar, and we are from South High School, and we're preparing this song for our small group EDC.
Rise, my soul, and take thy wings, thy better portion trace. Rise from transitory things toward thy native place. Sun and moon and stars decay, time shall soon this earth remove. Rise, my soul, and haste away to seats prepared above. Rivers to the ocean run, nor stay in all their throes. Isle standing sings the songs, must bend them to their sides. So
Wow, fantastic. Comments from other board members before I say something? Robin, I knew Robin would say something.
I've known Ruby since before she was born. So, dear lovely Ruby. Sarah Lickblau, would you like to explain what BOV stands for? I know the answer,
Yes.
but I think it's worth sharing.
Sure, it's Bella Orso Voci, which is Italian for beautiful Bruin voices. And we just shorten it to Bob because to say that for a class is a lot. So we just go Bob and everybody kind of knows now the tradition has been there.
Thank you.
Other board members? Nikki?
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Loved it. Thank you.
Others? I know we all loved it, even if we're not saying, yeah. Seth?
Once again, thank you for proving that March is my favorite month as a board member.
My only comment is bravo.
I loved watching how you communicate with each other as you're working through the piece. What a fantastic way for us to be able to start our meeting. I think we're going to be able to do our work in a very good way. Music unites, so thank you so much and good luck with the competition and with the rest of the year as you finish out. Thank you so much again. Thank you for the technical assistance. All right, moving on to the recognition of audience portion of the agenda. 3 individuals have signed up to speak with us this evening, and each individual will be given 5 minutes. And I don't have the exact language in front of me that I need to be reading right now. But at any rate, all 5 of you, or excuse me, all 3 of you will be given, thank you, here we go, stumbling. This is where Anne Marie, again, ensures her role within the school district. Okay, let me go again. At this time, the board will hear comments from the public. We ask that each speaker who has signed up to address the board state their name and home school district for the record. Speakers must refrain from using this forum to criticize or complain about a specific employee or student by name. Vulgar or profane language will not be tolerated. The board is interested in your comments and will listen carefully, but is not obligated to respond or to debate issues in this forum. Should you desire a written response to a specific question, you may request it. This evening, you will all be allotted a maximum of 5 minutes. Upon conclusion of the allotted time, a chime will sound and the speaker will be asked to conclude, and if necessary, a final chime will sound 15 seconds later, signifying the end of your time at the podium. And the first person that is signed up to speak, I am not going to say the last name because I don't feel I'll pronounce it appropriately, so if you would please help us with that, that would be great. It's Devin.
Okay. My name is Devin Stachinsky. I'm a parent of a student at Horseman Roosevelt. Repressive tolerance, as defined in 1965 by Herbert Marcuse, is a passive acceptance of social and governmental practices, policies, and actions which restrict freedom in an absolute sense. Repressive tolerance has 2 main forms. The first is the unthinking acceptance of entrenched attitudes and ideas, even when these are obviously damaging to other people. The second is the vocal endorsement of actions that are manifestly aggressive towards other people. I will give credit to this board. It has managed to perfectly execute both forms of repressive tolerance. Let us start with the first form, which has been extremely prevalent in and out in the open. This board has repeatedly, unthinkingly accepted the direction of Dr. Gandhi, in which the board should be directing Dr. Gandhi and not the other way around, and the direction of Dr. Tracy Newman with regards to all things COVID in clear violation of North Dakota Century Code 440422, as listed under Governance Process 11 by not voting every time the subject came up to allow discussion and votes from Dr. Newman. I will remind the board that these actions went directly against what you were being told to do by parents who this board answers to. The second form has become more troubling as of late with the vocal endorsement of actions that are manifestly aggressive towards other people. The language and actions suggested to be added to Governance Process 11 from the last governance meeting would violate at minimum 5 board member covenants from Governance Process 11, as well as Code of Conduct Section 1B of Governance Process 9 in showing loyalty to the governance committee and not to the district as a whole. The board should not be using governance committee to discuss general board business outside of general board meetings, regardless if quorum is met. There are several course corrections that can be taken. The first would be if you are adding the language to state voting must be in the district's best interest, you need to define parents, students, and/or teachers as the interested party and not the district administration nor the school board. The second would be to reduce the size of the governance committee so it will never have quorum, so business can only be discussed in the general body. Just these two things would help you regain some trust from the community. So I leave you all with a word of advice given in the U.S. Senate not so long ago. Do not add the language that forces the board to vote in lockstep or to punish dissenting opinions and data, because you will not always have the majority, and those new rules will be used against you. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Noel.
Hello, my name's Noelle Vernoy. My husband and I have 2 children here at the HMR, Horace Mann Roosevelt, 3rd and 2nd grade. I'm part of the silent majority. There are several reasons why standing up here has not happened in recent years, but I can't stand by any longer and be quiet. My 9-year-old has faced extreme anxiety the last couple of years. I didn't think I would get emotional. So much so that he will go into a state of hyperventilating. The only 2 people on this board that I have felt, and I've been following, that I have felt really work for and fight for my child and my family have been Jennifer and David. I'm completely appalled by this board, that they think it's okay to bully other board members that I voted in, that the public has voted in. Our son recently went to a school promotion called Hats Not Hate. Hats Not Hate. He came home with this hat. If I had 9 more of them, I'd give them out to all of you because I think you each need one. Number 2, that this board thinks it's okay to have 5 members meeting together for governance. I'd like a written response as to how you formed the governance committee and why Jennifer and David are not, neither one of them are represented on this committee. I'd also like a written response to the following question. It has come to my attention that a board member threatened another board member in years past. If new policy is made tonight, will there be a way to go back and also punish that person? I'd like to know why that person was never censured as well. Written response, please. June cannot come fast enough for many of us. I'd tread lightly tonight and think about the people that you work for. Don't underestimate the parents We are tired. We're tired of the decisions that have been made the last couple of years on our behalf. Your focus needs to be on education, not on making more policies that silence those who oppose your views. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last person to sign up is Matt. And please help us with your last name as well.
Hi, my name is Matt Kozak. I live in the Fargo School District. I had a few items I wanted to address concerning the accuracy of minutes and documents in the board meetings. My first example refers to minutes and meetings from November 23rd, 2021. Specifically, the recognition of the audience section. I spoke at that meeting, and the minutes report that Matt Kozak shared concerns about disinformation being shared at board meetings during the public comment period. That's not accurate. I thank Tracy for disputing FargoCast Public Health and what the information was on their website, which was about an hour into the meeting, had nothing to do with public comment, yet the minutes reflect that I was complaining about the public comment section. I'm requesting a response on why the minutes were recorded the wrong way and misrepresent my statements. The next topic I want to talk about is later tonight it appears you guys are voting on changes to GP12 and GP3. The point that I'm going to make essentially is that it will be unethical for you to vote as a board on these two documents because the original documents that these are stemming from are inaccurate, incomplete, and invalid. First, to clarify, which memo is 92? Online, on the Fargo Public Schools website, both are titled 91. The link might say 92, but the document, the PDF, both say memo 91. So how can you vote on something that's not available? I don't know if it changed for you guys, but at least on those PDFs, that's what's there, is 91. I sent you also an email too with those links and a recap of my message here. Am I out of time?
You have a few seconds left.
No,
Okay.
he has more. He has more.
Essentially, those are wrong. They come from monitoring documents. The monitoring documents aren't complete. They require explanations for inadequate responses, and there's not explanations for everything. There's more marks for one, but not responses. There's also in one of the monitoring documents, which you'll see in my email, it looks like somebody commented, but there's no board member attributed to that comment. How do we, the public, know that that is a board member who spoke to that? My recommendation to the board would be to go ahead and restart the process of those two monitoring documents to make sure they're accurate, valid, and complete. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening. Moving on to the report section of the agenda. Item A is our academic performance report regarding graduation rate data. Dr. Gross.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to quickly pull that report up on the screen so that we can share that together. But in your packet, what you will find is a copy of the slide deck that I'm going to share with you. And this evening, what I'd like to do is bring us back to our strategic plan and strategic initiative number 1, which all centers around student achievement and growth. In the strategic plan, it says in that section, as a result of the Fargo Public Schools efforts, our students will meet or exceed individual learning goals towards the achievement of district standards and benchmarks for academic proficiency in all content areas. And then from there, the strategic plan goes on to talk about one of the goal areas, which is goal area number 4 around assessment. I won't read that, but in that section, it talks about us using both formative and summative assessments, really to determine best practices and procedures that will help us make improvements in our student learning environment. From there, it goes on in particular to talk about one of the indicators of success or results, and that's graduation rate. And that's really what I'd like to talk about tonight. That indicator of success says the percentage of high school students who graduate on time will increase annually. Tonight, I'd like to share with you the 2020-2021 results as we look at that set of data. The data I'm going to share with you comes from the North Dakota Insights website, which is available for all districts across the state of North Dakota. And it also then allows members of our community to look at everything from graduation rate to academic performance and so on. But that's where this data set comes from. Tonight, as we talk about graduation rate, there's many different ways to define it. And the way that we'll be looking at it in particular, that connects directly back to the strategic plan, is a cohort model. And that's the graduation rate that is used across the state. So if we are comparing ourselves to any other district across the state or the state data in its entirety, it would be using this cohort model. And really what that is, it's taking all of the students who start in grade 9, add to it any students who join us over the course of the next 4 years, remove any students who transfer out of our district to another district, and that then is the subset that we are looking at to determine graduation rate. So as we look at the data in this 4-year graduation rate, you can see on the screen in front of you 3 sets of data from 2018-19, the 19-20, and the 2021 data. You can see from what's on the screen that as a state and as a district, from 18-19 to 19-20, there was an increase in the percentage of students graduating in that cohort model. But from 19 to 20 to 2021, you'll see at both the state level and locally, there was not an increase, actually a slight decrease. Now, knowing that what might be some of those factors, there are many factors that impact graduation rate. And as we look at studies around like Johns Hopkins and some of the other research institutes that really look at some of those factors that impact graduation rate, much of that centers around attendance, behavior, and course performance. And we know that during this time period that we're looking at, we had some things happening in our community that certainly impacted all of those things around attendance, behavior, and how our students did in some of their courses. There are other ways, though, to look at graduation rates. And one is sometimes some students need a little bit more time in order to complete all of their academic requirements. And on the screen now would be looking at what's called the 5-year graduation rate. So knowing that students might need that one more year, that gift of time to graduate. And what I'd like to draw your attention to there is as we look at those students who might have needed just a little bit more time to graduate, in the 3 years of data that's on the screen, you can see an increase in the district performance or the district's graduation rate. Also, one other way to look at graduation rate would be more of a traditional approach, which would be, let's just look at the seniors, that when they started and how many of those students graduated. That would be this traditional graduation rate. And you can see from 1920 to 2021, although the state was fairly flat, we did see an increase in percentage. So depending upon the data that we look at, we would say that we did not annually increase in the cohort model, but we did when it came to the 5-year graduation rate and the traditional graduation rate. I think the last 2 pieces of data show that some of the initiatives that we've put in place are beginning to show some traction, beginning to show some improvement in what we are doing as a system. But if we were just to look at what is articulated in the strategic plan, we would say that we did not meet this indicator according to our strategic plan. So what are some of those initiatives that we've put in place and will continue to do now into the future? Well, all 3 of our comprehensive high schools have embedded into the day, before period 1, an intervention time for all students that can come to meet with their own teachers to help them in their educational process, to help them with their coursework. One of those things that ties directly back to the research from Johns Hopkins, course performance. This allows students the opportunity to take a bus to school, be part of that intervention time, and then continue their day. So it's that intentional intervention that we're putting in place. We have online credit recovery in all 3 of our comprehensive high schools that will allow students who maybe did not complete a course satisfactorily another opportunity to gain that credit, which again comes back to course performance. And then our teachers are so giving of their time and the individual tutoring that they provide throughout the day. At our alternative high school, Dakota High School, we certainly have a very strong advisory program One of the pieces there is how do we build strong relationships, and then how do we encourage students to continue their educational pathway. And one of the things that they've done at Dakota is an outreach program where they every month reach out to students who have dropped out and encourage them to come back to complete and finish their graduation. We have night school opportunities for our students so that if they need another opportunity other than the traditional day to earn some of the credits, and you can see the courses that we offer there, they are the ones that are needed for graduation. And then we have a very large summer school program of both remediation and acceleration opportunities for our students. Recently, just this current year, we have hired 2 attendance specialists to help us within the district. Again, coming back to that research where attendance is one of those key factors. And our attendance specialists are really helping us to pilot an early warning intervention and monitoring system, which is a data-driven decision-making process that really looks for students who are at risk of dropping out, talks about what are the appropriate interventions to put in place, and then measure the effectiveness of those interventions. All of our buildings have been asked this year to create an attendance goal based upon the attendance within their setting from elementary, middle school, and high school, because we know it's not just a high school component that leads to graduation, but it's a student's opportunity all the way through K through 12. Not only are there the goals, but there are action plans that are created to really address the attendance issues across our system. This year, we are continuing conversations like we always do on ways to modify our multi-tier system of support, or MTSS, ways that we can make sure that students at the elementary and the middle school and the high school can get those interventions that they need to help them with their course performance. And then finally, we have hired a cultural specialist that will help us with to enact Senate Bill 2304, but also help us implement that early warning and monitoring system. So across the system, we have many things in place. As we look at those 3 different data sets, the one directly tied to our strategic plan, again, we would say we did not meet that. But in the 2 other ways that we could look at graduation rate, we do see an increase. To me, which is saying the things that we've put in place are beginning to work, and we'll continue to work on those moving forward.
Bob, I'm sorry. Can you explain? I know what it is, 2304, and I know who the hire was, but I think it's important for everybody to know.
So that legislation was enacted that we really focus on our Native American programming and education for our own staff when it comes to how do we include that in our coursework, but also how do we include that in our own professional development so that we are better and as a system to meet the needs of all of our students.
And that is a state legislative requirement.
Correct.
Thank you.
Are you ready for questions, Dr.
I am.
Gross? Okay. Dr. Gandhi, did you have something you'd like to share before we get into any questions?
I do, but I don't know IT.
Okay, how about if I go to board member questions? Let's see what happens. Jennifer, go ahead.
Thank you. So this week, Bob, I spent some time watching the Education Policy Committee online, chaired by Aaron Oban, and they had a presentation around the results found in the Innovative Education Study. And in there, they were talking about full-service community schools and some of the grants that, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, but where I'm going with that is they spent some time talking about where they've partnered and some of the schools specifically and districts, but they were speaking to specifically around MTSS in a section, as I recall, and really how they have the supports in place to really spend that time using, proven sort of models, right, to use and implement within the school. But they're really creating this partnership amongst schools and other community partners in order to address these needs, like you mentioned, that really speak to some of the initiatives that you talked about putting in place, and then they monitor them with fidelity to make sure, right, that across the board they're getting these outcomes that the goals that they've set. And so I guess really my question is around what sort of partnership have we done? I know there's been some at Jefferson, but specifically related to if the goal is to increase graduation rates and we've identified maybe reasons that we're not achieving that, like i.e. attendance challenges, that's something that also was identified in this study. They talk about ways and solutions, ideas, proposals, ways that we can help improve that. So really, what is Fargo Public Schools doing in that arena? Are we partnering with them on that? Are we adopting some ways or models? So you know where I'm going with that? That's my question.
A couple things. So Jefferson is our community school that we currently have, and one of the models that we saw very good results was doing targeted case management. And that is a partnership with an outside entity that, and one of the things I think we need to know is that we are unable to bill for some services around mental health or social work type services. And so having partners that can bill allow us to provide more service as we go. We did expand that with the use of ESSER so that some of our other buildings that have high-ranking needs have also been able to have targeted case management this year. So I will say we've learned some lessons around that. We also are currently applying for a community grant coordinator for CBE, because we do feel some of the pieces, what I'll call wraparound, are greatly needed, even with older student populations as we go forward. The other piece that we've done quite a bit of work is on mental health. And again, right now with the ESSER funding, it has allowed us to expand mental health options. So one of the pieces we've done right when COVID started was tele-mental health, and that was easier to do. But now at a few schools, we're actually have a contract where someone comes in for mental health for 4 or 5 hours. And I know that at the State of the Schools, we addressed that a little bit in our session, but we have found that for some students, they're unable to access that kind of support. And I think at AASA, I was able to attend a session, and something interesting was said is that when parents are surveyed around mental health supports, where do they get them? And they had to select from some choices. 80% of the parents felt the schools who they'd lean on, and 20% said medical. And so it shows that we are really viewed as a spot to help with that piece. So that does require partnership. Is that helpful?
It is, if I may just, for clarification, are those then built into the initiative specifically, and we're measuring progress as to whether or not it's translating into specifically related to what we're trying to measure in terms of graduation rates in this case?
Yeah, so I think that is a very good point, and I would say I don't think we're there yet on that measurement piece, but one of the anecdotal pieces we've seen is increased attendance on days that students are receiving services. And that is from our principals directly as we go forward. The other ones, I think it is hard because it's been such a small pilot in a sense of numbers that we are trying to work on our MTSS data collection to be more robust. So that was part of our University of Minnesota study. MTSS is a major piece that we had them review and give us some feedback on. And so that is one of the pieces why we are switching to a product called EduClimber to allow us to track the pieces that Bob went through: attendance, behavior, and academics, and that we come up with what I call a risk number is what we come forward with, which will allow us maybe to answer that question better as we go forward.
Dr. Gandhi?
I think one of the important conversations as we redevelop the strategic plan or renew our strategic plan for next year will be the indicators around graduation rates that we measure and what we monitor as a district. When you only look at a 4-year graduation rate and you look at year after year increase, unfortunately, currently the way our system is developed in the state of North Dakota, it's undermining or it's not recognizing the work of one of our premier campuses, and that's Dakota High School, and the work that they do. I share this because what administration will be looking for from board support, and we'll be sharing this at the next GAC meeting as well, is that we're actually going to be working with both the NDCL legislative group and DPI, because we've had some conversations with both Superintendent Basler and her team around the current definition of alternative education in the state of North Dakota. It's an archaic definition that's embedded in Century Code. And the current definition is, according to North Dakota Century Code, is that a school district can offer an alternative education program for students that have dropped out and are at least the age of 16. Well, the challenge with that is any research in education will tell you that ninth grade is a pivotal year for students. So the way our system is currently designed is in order to be able to provide an alternative education program, which is not a lesser program, it's just another means to learn for students that have a different learning preference, you have to fail your freshman year and then you have to fail again your sophomore year, magnifying your likelihood to drop out, and then you get access to a premier program based on relationships and self-paced instruction. That definition needs to change, and that's something that we're going to be working on so we can change that norm of what alternative education truly looks like. It's not what it once was perceived to be, probably when that was written into Century Code several years ago. So it is important to recognize that Fargo Public Schools, and including our neighbors who in West Fargo, we comprise about 25% of our students in the state of North Dakota. So when we're taking a look at graduation rates district-wide or compared to other districts in the state, we carry a large chunk of those students, almost a quarter of the students between our two school districts. Additionally, our three comprehensive high schools, they offer their current graduation rate exceeds 90%. So a more apples to apples comparison would be comparing school districts that don't have alternative education programs. But at the same point, we shouldn't undermine the alternative education program. They're by design for individuals that have already identified to drop out, which counts against the district's graduation rate. So that's an anomaly that we need to work on and look at during this next legislative session, because that significantly impacts our data as well.
I will echo that. We have been working on that for years and years, and our data has always skewed compared to the state. So thank you for mentioning that. We will certainly add that to our next agenda, which is building and building and building as I progress throughout this week. Thank you.
Jennifer?
Thank you. Can I ask a clarifying question? Actually, maybe two. You mentioned that a student has to fail freshman and sophomore year before they can pursue Dakota High School. So just to clarify, they can't opt in unless they've literally failed all of their courses I thought student could opt in for a variety of reasons.
Dr. Gross?
I think when we're talking about ninth grade year and failure, ninth grade year is probably the biggest predictor of student success or lack of success when it comes to graduation. And typically, if a student fails one or two classes during that freshman year, that's a very high predictive factor that they may not finish high school. When a student enters Woodrow Wilson, it is a school of choice in Fargo, but you have to be of a certain age and you have to make that decree. And really, it is a way for students not to drop out, but to transition to Woodrow Wilson, which is a different delivery method. And for many, that's the delivery method that meets their learning needs.
Okay, and then if I may ask a follow-up, so thank you for that. So it's really about the predictive, so that it is that they're a choice. And if I heard you correctly, if I'm wrong, you can correct me. And then my second question is really related to the scores themselves. Statewide, we're comparing cohorts, and we're talking about 25% of the kiddos attending alternative high school, and is that between Fargo and West Fargo? And don't all schools offer, or is it just the larger school districts that would offer this alternative sort of version as well? And so where I'm going with that is, aren't they all then encompassing in both the state number as well as our individual graduation rate numbers?
Dr. Gandhi, Dr. Gross?
And Dr. Gross, feel free to chime in as well. But so students can opt into our alternative education program at Dakota High School until they're at least the age of 16. So for us, it's sometimes sophomores and sometimes juniors at that point that you have the choice. The data can be twofold, right? So according to Century Code, we can offer an alternative education program for students that have dropped out or they're between the ages of 16 and 21. So when you have a student, if they've been unsuccessful with their freshman year, which is traditionally at the age of 14, right? You may have some anomalies there. They're not going to be able to utilize that program, or based on their 8th grade learner profiles, that's not something that's have access to them. So that's where it becomes a challenge. Now, once you go to Dakota High School, correct me if I'm wrong, there could be students that then go the GED route, there could be students that end up graduating. So that's where that numbers come. But chances are that that individual has already had to spend a freshman year if they were at the traditional age for when freshmen are at a comprehensive high school, which may have not been the best learning environment for them. So the system is designed where you're putting someone in a situation where you know that there's a better learning environment for them because it's self-paced instruction, there's more relationships, it's a different environment, but then they have to go to a environment first in that comprehensive high school. As for your question about the comparison to other school districts, I know of a few Class A schools. Our district, West Fargo, I believe might not, but there's a little bit of different, and then Mandan has a little bit of a different alternative education program. They serve a different student population that I know of. I'm not sure of Bismarck or some of the other ones, so I'm not sure if Dr. Gross does.
Go ahead, Dr. Gross.
So not all districts across the state do have an alternative high school setting. Many are at the larger districts, but that's not true across the entire state. So it is a choice at each district if they've made that determination to have that as an option for their students or not.
Robin?
Real quick comment. When I was new on the board, ninth grade in the north side was not in the high schools. And that was highly controversial as a new school board member that I approved, or I voted to approve a 9 through 12 curriculum and a true middle school model. And in fact, my son was the first ninth grade class at North High. I thought that was the right thing to do, and that really switched the mindset from accumulating a GPA at the high school level as opposed to Ben Franklin. I'm sure you remember this, Jennifer, 789. So this has been a long going process. I think it is very important for us to recognize alternative graduation models because I think it's better to be innovative and to meet the kids where they're at. I have met many new Americans that think it's absurd that we expect them to graduate in 4 years without the proper knowledge accumulated. So again, this is a differentiated education model that I think we should embrace as a board and celebrate as a community because kids achieve at different ages. So I really am happy with this report. Thank you.
David?
I have to say something here that really bothered me in listening to this. I heard it said, or I believe I heard it said, that if we looked at the graduation rates for Davies, South, and North, they would be higher, and made it sound as if Dakota is bringing them down. I think you would find people attending Dakota High School feel that they are a part of a Fargo High School just as the same as anybody else, and I don't think that there should be any move made to separate any of our seniors. We're looking at all of the kids together. I don't care if they graduate from Fargo South or North or Dakota. They are our students. They're not in an alternative setting. They are our high school students, period.
Dr. Gandhi?
I wholeheartedly agree. And so if there was any implication otherwise, that wasn't the case. It was the purpose to just show that the current definition of alternative education and what we're allowed to provide by North Dakota Century Code doesn't allow us to capture students and put them in the environment that they need first. And unfortunately, puts them in a situation where they have to spend a freshman year or an entire duration of a year, maybe even 2 years at a comprehensive high school. And we do believe that there could be individuals that could benefit by having opportunities and be even more successful early on in their career. So it is not to imply that they are, in fact, that they are separate at all. It's in fact to show that unfortunately, when we only look at a 4-year graduation rate, the work that they're doing at that campus isn't recognized by that indicator alone, which is why I said that as we move forward with the strategic plan, we need to look at multiple indicators to look at the success of our students, because that truly is reflective of the great work that's happening at Dakota and all of our high schools.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Great, thorough conversation. The next item, again, is on academic performance map data. Dr. Gross and Missy Eidsness and Dr. Hansen. Dr. Hansen, are you kicking it off?
I think I am.
All right, go ahead.
Sorry. In addition to graduation, we are going to report out on academic progress. As a school district, we do the measure of academic progress to meet Strategic Initiative 1, to really look at our learning goals and the growth of our students. We use assessments, of course, and similar to what Dr. Gross spoke about, formative, summative, and this one happens to be a yearly test that we give, and it shows growth amongst students so they have to test from year to year to show that growth. And so as we move forward, so our indicators of success, we do test students grades 3 through 9 with our MAP test, and we're looking at a growth target, and we want them to make adequate yearly progress or a year's growth within this measurement. And again, we do this test every year in January. And so this is pretty recent data that we have, and it is a computer, it's adaptive to the student, and it really measures where they started and to where they've gone. So each student has a different growth score. But we looked at bands of 3rd through 5th and 6th through 8th grade, or 6th through 9th. And again, we're looking at growth. And again, students' growth scores will be different. We do have to dig down as we look at this data individually by students. For students that are mobile, that may be at one school one year, but then in a different district the next, it will not measure that. Or if they're new to our district, it doesn't measure that year's growth yet until they're in our district for a full year. And so we do have to, that last sentence really talks about really considering other variables as we move forth. And I think that's where, Missy talked about EduClimber, looking at that data, really digging down into what students need and how we can really support their growth. And so it goes on a natural bell curve and really looks at how students grow in a year's progress. I'll go into that. So the first part is reading, grades 3 through 5. And so again, it goes through the growth, and it is just this population of 3rd through 5th grade students in reading. That orange line is that mean normative growth. So that is where we want the average student, we want to make a year's growth is at that 50th normative growth line. We have steadily gone down the last few years, and so currently we're at that 49, so we have about almost enough students to make that year's growth. And if we look, so I did pull some deeper data, which is available to both the board and the public on our strategic plan website. We're close to making that year's growth in all student groups, but really we do need to dig down and what will increase that student growth in all of those areas. Because really 3rd through 5th grade reading, we were all in yellow for the main part, that consistently we weren't making enough year's growth in reading. Opposite of that, we have 3rd through 5th grade math. And we took a sharp incline with that. And we did a sharp decline when we had COVID. And I think due to the teachers work with students, but I think with math being in person, it really showcases how important that is. Not that it's not important reading, but it is really important in math as well. So we actually jumped up higher than we've ever seen in the last many years. And really green across the board for most of our student groups. We do have an outlier with Native American students that is lower than the rest of that group. And so that would be something we would need to dig into a little further to see how do we support that student group and what part of the education are we missing and how can we support that? Following the same trend line, 6th through 8th grade reading follows that same trend line down. Although with middle school, it's still above that that normative growth line. So we're still making that adequate progress for a lot of our students, but we don't want to see their trajectory go down. And we have been higher in middle school. And again, that digging deeper into the data, it really was that Native American group that was the outlier. And we also, actually, that was the one, and our IEP students. So those are our two student groups that we'd really want to focus on with that. But again, following the same trend line, 6th through 8th grade math shot straight up again as well, higher than we've ever seen before. And actually digging down into that student group data, it was pretty green across the board. Our student groups are making adequate growth currently in middle school math based on the data that we see. So our indicators of success, we did not meet this indicator in reading, but we did meet it in math. And I think, again, it's due to the teachers' hard work. We are working hard with students, both in reading and math. And I think there's some additional things we can add on to with reading and really focus in on the data and what we need to do. So we met the measures 2 out of the 4 times from winter of 21 to 22. So our next steps, we really do want to focus on literacy, continuing the strong work in math. But with literacy, and this does relate directly to both our strategic plan and the University of Minnesota work, one is to work on our tier 1 or that universal instruction for all kids. And specifically to reading, what are our tier 1 instructional practices? What do we expect in reading? And then we are going to add some strategies around the science of reading to really look at how students learn to read and dig down deep with the data to really target the interventions specifically to how the data shows that students learn to read. We're going to establish some common tier 1 instructional time. And Dr. Gross also mentioned we have taken a great step forward in middle school with our MTSS process. I'm really proud of the work our teachers, our coaches, our directors have done around that. It's tremendous work and gives me goosebumps because they've taken something and they've problem solved, they've looked at data, and they've worked on the system to change what we're doing. And I think it will benefit kids. We'll continue to collaborate instruction across schools with our learning walks. We'll roll out our instructional playbook next year. Principals and coaches have gotten their hands on this playbook, which really talks about what are the instructional strategies, that tier 1 instruction we should see across the board regardless of content. And so now getting that into the teacher's hands, it aligns directly to teacher evaluation and observation and really giving that direct feedback to teachers around their instruction. And again, the right-hand side, the multi-tiered systems of support. So continuing to review and engage within that system, looking at where we can continue to improve, looking at our strong supports we already have, and then continuing with our elementary MTSS system, but then with middle school, really moving forward with that. So Dr. Gross and Missy, if you have anything to add.
Anything to add? Missy, Dr. Gross? Not at this point? Okay. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah. Questions or comments from board members? Jennifer?
Thank you for your presentation and for your information. And I'll just circle back to some of the information I was talking about earlier and asking Bob specifically to some of the innovative ideas that came from the education study. And specifically, you mentioned tier 1. And they talked about that and how a public school spends and needs to spend, right? I mean, we're talking about 49% and right. Their time is really targeted towards tier 1 and what some of these initiatives we're doing to address tier 2 before students to identify earlier. So to prevent, really a higher need as the student grows throughout school. And so specific to that point, they really mentioned, this AmeriCorps National Service. Okay. And so I just thought maybe you could, if we are indeed implementing or using or partnering with them, if you could maybe speak to that and what we're doing in that area.
Certainly, and Missy, please jump in too, but we do use Reading Corps with our students, and I was fortunate to see it happen at Centennial, and it does pull students that we select based on data and really direct support on skills that these students need. And it's a very successful program, and it's something that we should be really proud of that we have here in our district.
So do we actually hire the tutors? I mean, or they provide the tutors, right? And
It's a joint effort. So we post it, but we hire together the teachers or the tutors that we have. And then I know at Centennial, again, that Reading Corps person worked directly with our instructional coach with the data, with pulling the right students and making sure that it fit within schedules so that they could seamlessly enter into our building and just start with groups.
And so have you seen then sort of the return you've seen in the data sets? Has it been implemented long enough to see the indicators are working. The progression is being made and student numbers are increasing because our reading scores across North Dakota, right, are, what is it? I think that they said like 62% below proficiency.
Yeah.
So specific in reading and math, right? So maybe Missy, I sort of.
You bet. One of the pieces that we're seeing, and that's why we're switching that MTSS tool to look at our data, is that right now it is a little more cumbersome to pull out all the kids who've had, for example, AmeriCorps for the reading, and then see how they're doing against their peers. And in our new system, we're able to tag things and pull that group out more easily to compare. So I do think that that would be a great group for us to look at that progress. But my understanding is they have some tight standards about when they exit kids. So that's probably one piece we could look at is the exiting of kids that start with them. But again, the shortage of people, we haven't been able to fill everyone that we could have, if that makes sense, those positions. But it's a wonderful program.
Yeah, it sounded like it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other board members with questions, comments? Well, it sounds like one of the groups that continuously needs support is the Native American students. And so certain that, again, too, thinking about the high school graduation information, I know that we have deeper information than what you provided to us this evening because that was more umbrella overarching. But to be able to drill down on what we need to continue to work on as a district to target that group.
And I will say our cultural specialist that we hired this year has, and I'll speak directly to the elementary, but he's also worked with the secondary, has done a great job. He has worked with our facilitators on realigning our social studies curriculum to really meet the needs of all students, but also to build those relationships with Native American students and to really, I think, encompass that Native American spirit around our schools. And so I really do see some great progress moving forward. And if we can continue to have that as part of our curricular framework, if we can use that as part of our frame, I think we can better meet the needs of our Native American students.
It'll be wonderful when we get to the opportunity to have a report where we see growth from the work that we've been doing. Robin, go ahead.
So is Ricky White a full-time FTE?
Yeah.
Okay.
Through ESSER, I believe. Yep.
Okay.
And he's been working directly in the classrooms. He's worked with principals. He's worked with teachers. So he's really reaching out to schools, and he's in the building. He's been part of our learning walks to really look at all of what we offer instructionally. It's been a great addition.
Wonderful, wonderful person. Thank you. Thank you.
Jennifer, I know you have a question. I'm wondering, does anyone else have a question or comment before? Brian, go ahead.
I would just make the comment that I'm excited that, in this last bullet here, we're continuing to collaborate with our instruction across the schools and talking about the instructional practices, because I'm pretty sure that all of our kids are going to need, help or to try to improve, because I'm sure they're not all perfect. And so they're given opportunities to get better each day in reading and math.
Absolutely, and it's about individual students. You're right. Every student comes in with different needs, and we're going to try to meet all of those needs as they come in.
And I think it's probably important to know that it's just a snapshot of the day too, as well.
Yes.
And so
It's one test.
It's one test each time, and so there's lots to this than just
Absolutely.
this. Not to take any away from this.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Jennifer, and then Dr. Gandhi.
So on the topic of the Native American group that we're talking about in graduation, and really that being a standout group of kiddos that might have shown greater decline. I seem to recall maybe 2 years ago, and Rebecca, you might remember this, or some others, that we had a presentation from whomever and I'm forgetting her name, was the director at the time, and really had implemented a purposeful, strategic plan, and we saw the results really showing an increase in that student population in terms of graduation rates and academic progress. And so my question is, because I remember it specifically landing on me like, wow, we've made significant gains. And so what happened outside of COVID? If we're talking about a number of years where we're seeing a decline more than 1 year, do we know what happened?
And I think you're talking, we have a report that comes to us annually, I
Yes.
believe, from the Indian Ed program. I don't know when we're scheduled to receive that report again, but I do believe it's been a report that's been annually. I remember at least the last couple of times. So, Dr. Gandhi, did you have an additional comment?
I had another comment around another data set, but I'll let someone else answer that just because I think the program that Jennifer you're probably referring to is the Indian Ed Check and Connect program that we had, or modeled after the Check and Connect with the mentor program. I think as far as I know, we're continuing that, but that also doesn't change the work that we do. The comment I was going to make is this year, our MTSS coordinator, Jen Sarge, presented on MTSSB or on the social emotional learning side, but the data point's the same. When we're taking a looking at student progress and student achievement throughout our school district, proficiency at one point in time, like Brian referenced, is going to be a benchmark for a standardized assessment, but one of the biggest pieces that we're going to look at to determine the implementation or the success of our program is going to be the fluctuations between who's getting tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 services. That's a data point that I would just also tell the board to take a look at, because as you grow as a district and as we have more students with differing needs or coming in with different starting points, knowing where our tier 1 instruction is providing supports versus tier 2 versus tier 3 and seeing that reduction of students that need tier 2 to tier 1 is almost as important as a proficiency assessment at one point in time as well.
Okay. I am certain if we have additional questions, you'll all be welcome, to helping us get the answers that we need. So thank you for the time this evening. Very much appreciated. And the next item is a STEAM monitoring report. We have a video that has been prepared for us, from what I understand.
I just disconnected it. Let me reconnect. Sorry.
All right, no problem.
Bill, I said there was a time where I did that, disconnected a board meeting, and you didn't let me live it down, so this is...
Hello. Happy Music in Our Schools Month. Always, but especially this month, we celebrate the incredibly strong music program in our district. We recognize the dedicated music teachers. We thank the district and board for making music a priority in Fargo Public Schools, and we are reminded about the amazing effects music education has on students. Music study is not only enriching in its own right, but there is much evidence that a high-quality music education in school helps young people to develop intellectual capacity, to remain committed to attending school, and to do better in later years, whether pursuing music and the arts professionally or in using skills that transfer to other fields. Many scientific studies have been conducted to see the vast effects music education has on students. The results of these studies are building a solid foundation of evidence that music instruction is not only inherently worthy, but that it helps young minds grow and flourish. Music education builds the intellect. Music research explores the relationship between music education and the development of a young person's cognitive skills. It covers a wide range of topics, from the fascinating way that music making promotes the growth of neural connections in the brain, to music's role as correlating with math and language learning, to evidence that IQ scores rise with increased frequency of music study. New reports are emerging on a regular basis that substantiate our understanding of music's impact on development. But in order for these benefits to reach children, we have to continue working together to ensure that all children have access to music education. It must be said that the opportunity to learn music for its own sake is in itself an important reason for studying music. But there are additional benefits. Studying an instrument increases spatial temporal reasoning skills, which is our ability to visualize in space and time. It's an important skill in solving math and engineering problems and in understanding fractions and proportions. Music students develop the mental flexibility to think and read ahead while performing a precise task in the present. As students begin to compose and improvise, they learn to consider options in real time and make quick decisions. Since music is a language in its own right, musicians learn to think in pitches, timbres, and tempos without the aid of words and sentences. Translating these musical thoughts into the act of playing an instrument or singing introduces young minds to thinking in the abstract. Musicians practice in order to master a piece of music. The discipline and honest self-evaluation required is excellent training for any future activity. In education, there is, of course, an ongoing discussion of how intelligence and learning is assessed and what the outcomes mean. Music comes into play here as well. UCLA professor Dr. James Catterall led an analysis of U.S. Department of Education database used to track more than 25,000 students over a period of 10 years. The study showed that students involved in music generally tested higher than those who had no musical involvement. The test scores studied were not only standardized tests, such as the SAT, but also reading proficiency exams. The study also noted that the musicians scored higher no matter what socioeconomic group was studied. A study funded by the NAM Foundation and published in Psychological Science examined the influence of music education on non-music abilities, the effects of music lessons on academic performance, and the development of information processing and cognitive abilities. The study revealed that students who participated in music lessons showed statistically higher IQs. The College Entrance Examination Board reports that students of the arts continue to outperform their non-arts peers on the SAT. SAT takers with coursework or experience in music performance scored 41 points higher on the math portion of the test and 57 points higher on the verbal portion than students with no coursework or experience in the arts. When musically trained students get to college, they continue as high achievers, especially music majors. A study of 7,500 university students revealed that music majors scored the highest reading scores among all majors, including biology, English, chemistry, and math. Also, physician and biologist Lewis Thomas studied the undergraduate majors of medical school applicants. He found that music majors who applied to medical school had the highest percentage of accepted students of any group. For biochemistry majors, 44% of applicants were admitted. For music majors, 66% were admitted. Many studies support similar conclusions. Music making helps the brain develop in many positive ways, and it advances core learning and personal skills for life. Music is not an extra, but a core subject. It should be taught to all students at all grades. The music programs in Fargo Public Schools are very strong and supported programs. We continue to be one of the strongest districts for music education, not only in the state, but also in the nation. So now it's time to share the wonderful things that are happening in our own music programs. Live performances are back. Everyone is so excited to have live performances back. Here you can see all the North High Orchestra playing together. There's been such a huge difference in morale now that students are able to perform again with each other and for each other. And such an effect on the audience to have live music back. We've been able to have outstanding musicians and artists visit our district and work with our students. Amit Peled, a professional cellist who performed with the Fargo Moorhead Symphony Orchestra, was able to visit Ben Franklin Middle School and work with their students. Sonic Escape, a flautist and violinist that studied at the Juilliard School and are now YouTube sensations, visited all of the Fargo Public Schools middle and high schools and worked with the music students. They shared about their classical training, but also how they branched off from that and how they now do more folk style performing and travel worldwide to perform. The MSUM Jazz Band was able to visit Discovery Middle School and perform for students. Chuck Lazarus, a professional trumpeter, visited South High School to perform for and work with the band students. He shared great insight and stories about how the life skills he has learned through music have impacted his life in so many ways. Our Fargo Public School students have been able to participate in music festivals, competitions, and events again. Many had been canceled the last 2 years due to COVID, but most, if not all, are being held again. Here are some Davies Band students who participated in the Ploy-Har Band Festival at Valley City State University. These events give the students an opportunity to learn from other students and professionals. They also strengthen the students' musical community and continue to build pride in their programs. They are also great exercises and taking and learning from constructive criticism to grow their talents. A positive that came from these COVID years is the ease and ability to connect with and learn from leaders in our topics. This school year, we were able to work with 2 nationally and internationally renowned music specialists. Dr. Scott Edgar did a virtual professional learning event with our secondary performing arts teachers. As you've heard from me before, in the past 2 years, the elementary music teachers have worked with Dr. Edgar quite extensively. Last year during this presentation, I believe it was Nikki Gullickson who asked if the secondary teachers would have an opportunity to work with him as well. We got right on that, and they had a great session with him in the fall that focused on SEL in the secondary performing arts classrooms. In February, Dr. Alice Hamill, a genius in the world of adaptive music, did a professional learning event with our elementary music teachers. They learned more about how to reach different kinds of learners and how to do this in adaptive music classes, as well as the general music classes they teach. I would like to close with a full-hearted thank you. Thank you for your dedication to support providing Fargo Public School students with outstanding music education. Happy Music in Our Schools Month.
Thank you, Bill Westrick, for helping us have access to that presentation.
May I comment, Rebecca?
Sure, go ahead, Robin.
Today is Raging Red Band Festival, and so I think that needs all of our high schools are participating in that. But I want to make a comment, and clearly I've learned a lot about music in the last decade from my husband, and I want to talk about public education and what it offers to our kids. If music was not offered in public schools, many of our lower income students would not have the opportunity to participate. And that is something that I think is part of preparing the well-rounded student and the whole child for life and success. So as we look at, there are many districts across the country that have eliminated music and Phi Ed. So what can we do as a district to prioritize all of these great needs that our students need? We clearly know from the data that Ainsley so eloquently shared that some of our music students perform academically well as well. So this is one more of those things that we need to balance, school board, as to what we are going to prioritize going forward. Thank you, Ainsley, for your presentation. I realize that you did that via remote. You're a beautiful baby boy. Enjoy your time with him. Thank you for your support, Ainsley.
Comments from other board members? Likely not questions, comments. Unless there's someone else from administration that can help. Nikki, go ahead.
Thank you, President Knudsen. I'd like to reach out to say to Ainsley too, if she sees this, thank you so much. And I am really thrilled that you included the statistics that you did, because I think it really proves a wide variety of things when we talk about, oh, they're just singing a song. But there's so much more that goes with that, and what our students gain and the benefits from having the music programs that we have here in Fargo. Absolutely amazing, and hats off, and thank you for all you do. And this was a wonderful presentation, and yes, enjoy that little guy.
The numbers that we received from the information in the earlier reports this evening would likely be quite different in the way that we might not be happy about if we did not have music in our schools to the extent that we do. So Yes, thank you also for providing that report to us. The next item is the FEA report, and I know that Kim Belgard was not able to be here tonight. She mentioned that someone else would be here in her position, in her place, Matt Hulquist, but I'm not sure if he's here. I have not seen him. Okay, so we will move on. I did have a meeting yesterday with Kim Belgard, so we had our regular lunch meeting. I'll report on that later, but just wanted to let you know about that now. Then we'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Gandhi.
Two things. One, I think board members are aware we have shared communication with our staff and with our parents that what our plan is going to be should we have, hopefully we don't, but inclement weather for the remainder of the school year. Assuming there is no more inclement weather between now and the start of spring break, which would be next Wednesday, the district will be transitioning to distance learning. If there is inclement weather that requires cancellation of school between now and spring break, we will use one day to transition to provide staff that opportunity to make sure that they're ready to go, and then any inclement weather following that would be for distance learning. So just a quick update on that's what our plan is. The second item is really just an FYI with the way that I view our executive limitation policies, but should there be any, if I'm misinterpreting something or if this falls into the board's purview, please let us know, because Missy and I will take it to the board according to whatever the board members feel is appropriate. But we do, as we look at our demographic reports for next year and we are looking at our staffing and our enrollment patterns, we as administration are identifying the need to move Horace Mann Roosevelt is one of our paired campuses, and we are looking at a need to potentially reconfigure the pairings. So second grade would have to move from Horace Mann to Roosevelt. Now, it wouldn't be that the numbers require the entire second grade unit to move. However, we don't want to split up a section between two buildings as well. And Missy will definitely be able to share more in terms of what the numbers are looking like, or that's one of the options. That is not something that's definitive. That is not something that is something that we wanted to explore and maybe even have those conversations with impacted constituents and the building. But at the same point, it's one of those gray areas as we look at our EL, whether that falls in administrative purview or not. So just kind of wanted to share that. That is something that we're looking for, and if that's something that requires board action, which I don't view it in the ELs, then we would just look for that guidance as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Gandhi. We can, I guess, if there are any board members that end up feeling like that needs to come in front of us, just let me know, and we'll move forward as need be. When do you feel that if there is a change, when do you feel that might need to be decided by? What would the goal be?
I will respectfully defer to Missy Ednes.
Go ahead, Missy.
So we're going off the RSP projections that we received in December, and where we're seeing the growth is at kindergarten and first grade for next year would change from 3 sections to 4 sections each. Now, if it doesn't materialize, I think we have to make sure that we're very clear with people. We're going off the projections, but with that, they are growing, and so we would need to we could keep 1 section of second grade at Horace Mann, but we really felt since we had space at Roosevelt, we'd move all 3 sections of second grade. And there are some advantages that way also, just for us on servicing the kids by keeping second grade together for interventions and some of those pieces. But it is a school-wide title building, so it's not where they would lose any services at all. But it does look like they would remain at this enrollment level for the next 4 years. So it could be that they'd be there for a few years. I just wanted to, is where we're at.
That's good information, and growth is not bad.
Especially on the north side.
Exactly. Thank you for that. All right, let's move on to the consent agenda and then take a break before we get into business. Is there a motion for approval of the consent agenda? Robin?
I move approval of the consent agenda with the HR addendum, with the exception of the original items H and I.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Seth. All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Opposed, same sign. All right, the consent agenda is approved. Let's take a 5-minute break. So back at 7. Going back into we're getting started again here at 7 o'clock. Thank you. We took a short break, getting into the business section of the agenda. The first item is a postponed motion from the February 8th meeting regarding substitute pay, memo 93. Jim, would you like to introduce this?
Sure. Based upon the action the board took at our February meeting on February 8th, planning took the time at our February planning meeting to really delve into some data on substitute teachers and what the cost function would be if we actually took action to increase to $200 per day. So I want to share some data that administration had been able to put together that is in the memo. If you look at the bottom of the first page of the memo, you'll see the daily substitute pay for true substitute teachers that we've hired and the estimated increase that a $200 a day rate would lead to about $581,000 of additional cost through the course of an entire year. If you then go to page 2, because that's only one form of substitute teacher we have in the district, we also have in-house subs. This is when our own staff gives up a prep period, for instance, to cover a class when we weren't able to go hire an outside substitute teacher. So this is one of our normal FTEs, and we would see an increased cost, again, if we projected out the entire year at $200, of about $468,522. So those two pools, if we raise them both up to the $200 per day level, would have increased the cost over what we currently had thought budget-wise it would be by approximately $1,050,000, give or take. There is a third category of substitute teacher, of course, and that is our long-term subs, and we've included that data in the memo as well. They wouldn't necessarily have any pay differential because of this motion that's in front of the board. The next piece of data just shows you the pay rates for our neighboring districts, Moorhead and West Fargo, and you can see that we're all pretty comparable. Slight differentials on the bonus rates, but pretty much uniform throughout the community. And I didn't get the data on the private schools and what they pay, but I'm assuming they're going to have to be comparable too, because we're really all going after the same pool of substitute teachers in the community. They also pulled together some data just nationwide to see what's going on with substitute pay as well. So we looked at 129 large school districts and really saw that basically we're really seeing regionally pricing about the same as everybody else. And the increase, interestingly, that's been going on since COVID came about at least, has been ranging probably in those same large districts in the neighborhood of 0 to 20%, with the vast number being 10% or less. So as we discuss this at planning, we are not coming forward with per se a recommendation. We felt our job was to get the data for the board to digest. We did have several considerations that we felt were worth noting, and I'll share those on behalf of the committee. This is clearly very operational in nature, setting the pay level. So this is outside of the normal role of what we as a board would do. Doesn't mean we can't do it. It's just outside of our normal role. Several on the committee thought the increase going from our current rate of $112 up to $200 was, quite frankly, just too high of a percentage increase compared to what happens in most jobs in our community. There was discussion about how the motion originally was presented, we believe, was that this would sunset at the end of this school year, and that may come with complications as well. It doesn't mean we can't do it if we were to increase it to $200, There was just concern over, well, what does that lead to when we ask that sub to come back next fall at $80-some less per day, if we went back to the original 112 number. One other thing that was discussed is that there really may not be other qualified substitute teachers that more money will attract, so we may just be attracting the subs that are going to West Fargo and Moorhead. And in fact, that probably would be what would be happening until such time as the neighboring districts would then either increase to match whatever we'd increase to. So it may not have a long-term solution for us anyway, but it might in the short term. I think the committee had more support for increasing the pay for our in-house subs than those that we hire as pure substitute teachers. Thought maybe that would help get more of our full-time staff who really understands our curriculum to volunteer to teach those extra assignments if they actually got paid more for doing them. So there seemed to be more support, at least as the chair of the committee, for that as I listened to people. And I think overall the committee is supporting the idea of paying more, just wasn't sure that much of an increase was what was needed. So I think that was the discussion we had at the committee level. Those that were at the committee that day, feel free to correct anything or add anything that I might have missed.
Thank you, Jim. And I just wanted to reiterate that the motion that was made and seconded, which is available for discussion now, was that effective immediately, substitute pay for elementary teachers be increased to $200 per day, and substitute pay for middle and high school teachers be increased to $175 per day through the 2021-22 school year. So that was the motion that was made and seconded. So thank you, Jim, for that information, and thank you to the planning committee members for meeting and getting this, working to get this information together, everyone that was involved in that to help us aid in the conversation tonight. So I will open it up. David, since you made the motion, is there anything that you would like to speak to at this moment?
Yes, there is. First of all, it should be known that our substitute teachers are fully certified teachers. They're capable of being hired to fill a classroom position. As such, they would receive much more than $200 per day, even at the starting salary, because a substitute teacher does not, money isn't put into TFFR for them, nor is anything put toward their insurance. Starting teachers receive a contribution of 13% or 12.5%. 12.5% into TFFR, and they receive a significant portion of their health insurance. Substitute teachers receive neither one of those. So a substitute teacher, even at $200 per day, is not receiving nearly what a starting teacher would do, even though they're performing all of the functions of a regular classroom teacher. Secondly, this was not meant to go beyond the end of the year. I heard what Jim said, and it would have to be publicized as that. This is an experiment. This is an attempt to see if we can solve a very, very critical problem that we have. We must have teachers in all of these classrooms. Currently, what's happening, especially at the elementary level, is that they are taking and putting 2, and I've heard sometimes 3 classes together just simply so those classes can be covered. One of the things that should have come to our minds after seeing what happened during COVID was that our number of incidents dropped dramatically when we reduced class size by having kids in class only Mondays and Wednesdays or Tuesdays and Thursdays. When those class sizes were reduced by 50%, the numbers of incidences in the classes dropped to almost 0. So you can imagine what would happen if you were to take and put 3 elementary classes together with 1 teacher and whatever paras that she had assigned to her. This is designed only as an experiment. I did not intend for it to go beyond the end of the year. And that's why I'm a little bit perplexed about the planning committee showing you a $1 million bill when in actuality, according to my math, the very, very maximum that I could see this costing us would be about $338,000. That's based on approximately 55 more days of school, and I'm off by a couple there. And the fact that Doug provided me with the information that we were using about 70 subs per day. I took the full $88 difference, which would be the difference between what we currently pay of $112 to $200, even though the motion specifically said that middle school and high school teachers would receive only $175. That, and just to explain that, that was based on the fact that Dr. Condi provided us with the information that an elementary day was actually longer. And through my experience as both a high school and middle school teacher, there were many, many cases in which I could have my kids working independently. No first grade teacher is going to find any of her students working independently for any longer than possibly 45 seconds. I think the amount of interaction with students is much, much higher at the elementary level, and I address that with the amount of sub pay. I agree that we may be attracting teachers from West Fargo and Moorhead. I regret that situation because they are struggling with the same problems we have. However, I have to be more concerned with my Fargo kids than with other districts because I am on the Fargo School Board and I was elected to take care of them. Secondly, this may be enough to get some of our retired teachers out there to say, you know, $200 a day, if I were to pick up 5 or 6 days a month, that's another $1,000 in my pocket. Maybe that would be enough. And then you're talking about getting somebody in the classroom who has true experience and could truly step in just as if they'd never left. I think that there is nothing to lose by attempting this for the rest of the year. $338,000, if I'm correct, is not an insignificant amount of money. But I believe that it is in our budget to cover this, and if it were to make a significant difference in the number of substitutes we got, I think it's a win-win situation. And I really hope that you would vote to give this a shot.
Thank you, David. Comments from board members, Seth, or questions?
Yeah, David, all your points are completely valid, and I completely support the idea of paying them more. I'm not quite sold on the dollar amount. And then I just would have one, and literally this just kind of popped into my brain right now, even after having a planning meeting about this. If this is an experiment, I worry about the amount of money that we're experimenting with skewing our data by reviewing the experiment. Because if we increase that pay by $88, almost 90, pushing 90%, I think it's quite obvious that every substitute teacher in our community is all going to want to flood to Fargo, which is what we want. We want our subs filled, but I don't know what kind of data we're really going to see by making this an experiment to see if it will happen long term. I think if we kind of meet in the middle between somewhere we can stay comfortably long term and increase it dramatically a little more than what we have in previous years, I feel like we would be able to get some more precise data on if this experiment is working. If that makes sense. I just feel like increasing it that much, it's obvious we're going to get a flood. And now we don't know whether or not that's going to sustain if we go back. That's my concern.
And Seth, you might be thinking about this a little bit more. I'd be curious if you had a different figure in your mind. So maybe to share after a couple of other folks have the opportunity.
And I would just add too, I feel increasing the amounts that much, I think we would be able to get a lot better data from our experiment if we were in a more isolated district where we didn't have two comparable districts that you literally could walk in 2 minutes from. I think we'd be able to tell if increasing the dollar amount does in fact fix our problem if we didn't have the competition that basically we'd be blowing out of the water by doing this.
Brian?
You thought, David, of paying more people more money is great. I could agree with you. This clearly is operational. And the reason why it kind of says why it's operational is you're claiming it's this amount of dollar. Jackie and her staff put together these dollars, and so who do we believe? Do we believe you, Jackie? Who do we believe here? Which is it? We got done hearing about music education, on how important that is. I wonder what music education would feel about $300,000 or $500,000 in their program, or the math program, or CTE, or any other program. They're all dollars that all of our kids can use. And so I'm just really, the concept, yeah, we got to try to pay people more money to try to get them to sub to help eliminate these travesties that we're having combined classrooms. But I don't know if it's going to work. You don't know if it's going to work. Nobody knows. We really don't. And there's no data that's going to tell us. So I'm more comfortable at putting this all back on our administration and keeping it operational. And when they're going to put together the budget next year, that they'll figure something out when they're putting together that budget. I'm quite convinced. And it will be our job then as a board to either accept that or reject that. And those are questions we certainly can ask.
David, before I go to you, I know Tracy had her hand up, and then you can go ahead. Tracy, go ahead.
Thank you. There was just a few considerations in this document that was given to us that I think it's important to highlight. They really got my attention. So first of all, our district has invested significantly in long-term teacher substitutes. So currently we have 36 on staff, and we're in the process of recruiting up to 40. So one of the things that was pointed out here is if the base daily rate for long-term subs is $228. So if we were to raise this number up to 200, we would significantly close the gap between those two groups. And I can just see that influencing who's incentivized to do what. I mean, why would someone agree to a long-term agreement that locks them in when they can just earn to around the same amount of money and have more flexibility accepting daily assignments? So I think that's an issue. Another one is we know that one of the core issues this is stemming from is increasing amount of teacher absences. And over the last 2 years, those have been due to COVID quarantining and isolation protocols. And once that is going to start to hopefully go away, is this really going to be a continued problem to the magnitude we're seeing it now? I think those are just interesting things, and I thank the planning committee for addressing those.
David, go ahead.
Okay, first of all, if I could address Tracy first. I believe, and please, Dr. Gandhi, correct me if I'm wrong, long-term subs also receive something toward health insurance, do they not?
I'm looking at Doug, but he's nodding yes.
And do they receive a contribution into TFFR?
Yes, if they carry, and just a point of clarification, our substitutes, whether they're daily or long-term, at a minimum, we require that they carry an interim sub-license. So what that requires is up to 48 semester credits of college, but all of our substitutes, whether they're long-term or daily, are not certified. We can't offer them actually a certified contract because they don't carry that teaching degree. So just a point of clarification there, where Some of our substitutes do carry a regular teaching license, but most of them do not. They're just required to carry the interim license.
So putting it into context then, with them receiving a TFFR contribution and health insurance contribution, that significantly raises it above the $200 amount that I'm proposing for substitute. The second is addressing Brian's question. Now, this is operational, and by operational, you mean that the administration sets the salary for substitutes or for substitute teachers, correct? Why is that done when we negotiate with the teachers for their salaries every year? And that's, that's setting it. Why should the board not become involved in setting substitute salaries when we set the teaching salaries for everybody else within the district? It apparently, the administration has done nothing about it because the salary for subs is still the same as it was in 2020. So maybe we should be addressing it because it's not, it has been a continuing problem and no attempts have been made to change it. So if it is operational, first of all, I don't see why it should be. And secondly, I think the administration should have stepped up and done more than they have. And I agree, the long-term subs is a great idea. It truly is. I applaud Dr. Gandhi for doing that, and I hope he gets all his 40. That's still going to leave us many, many days when we do not have subs in the classroom. And as I said, I wanted to try this out. That's why I put a sunset clause on it. I know that this is a significant increase in money, and I did not want to make it a burden. I wanted it to possibly show us that, hey, next year, if we look at doing a significant increase to the substitute salaries, maybe we won't have this problem in the future.
Since David's motion from the previous motion was just regarding the 2021-22 school year, how would, and I know, David, you provided some financials, but I'm wondering, with the information that David presented, is that in line with what administration would know of, considering that the proposal would be sunsetting at the end of the 2022 school year? Jackie?
I would say the method he used to calculate that is accurate, as an estimate.
Okay, thank you. Jim, I know you had your hand up. Were you saying the same?
It's about a third of a year.
Right. So it's different information that we have in this memo. That's just wanting to make sure that we're all aware of that. So I think this is a really interesting and important conversation to be having. And I'm not quite sure yet where I'm going to be going with this. And part of the reason I say that is, one, I do like the fact that there is a sunset on this right now, and that it could be looked upon as information to gather to see how it might impact our current situation. And so if there could be potential, not as much of a risk as what there could be if we were looking at having this be long-term. And I realize that maybe the conversation could change depending upon if this motion were to pass and we were starting to see an increase in helping to fill our subs, then we might end up having this same kind of a conversation down the road. If it doesn't help, then it doesn't cost as much. The other challenge, though, that I have, and I was wondering if this was discussed at planning at all or not, and maybe not because it doesn't pertain to the motion, but there are so many other areas in the district within our budget and with our staffing that I feel, and likely many of us feel, need to be addressed regarding shortages. I'm thinking about paras, for example. And I know that the motion is about substitute pay, but I just want it's hard for me to think about this in isolation because I'm also trying to be sensitive to what some of the other staff in our school district might think, and that I certainly would not want the takeaway to be, oh, then, what about us? You're not talking about additional needs for the work that we're doing as well. Jim, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just a couple things. First, to answer your question, we briefly at planning acknowledged the fact that this doesn't address the para substitute shortage, but that's a problem as well. But one piece of data that I keep struggling with, and part of me is struggling with the year end. Okay, and David, you're absolutely right. Planning and the numbers administration had just projected what the cost would be for a full year. The reason I have a problem with this idea that we're going to address this and sunset it is I don't think this is a COVID problem, quite frankly. If you look at our data that was put together, we had a total of 11,806 what we call units of subs in 2018. I'm pretty sure that was pre-COVID. Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong there. 2021, which is a completed year, we had 11,725 units. Now, I'm going to guess maybe there were some subs we couldn't cover in 2021. So maybe that number would have been higher if we could have filled them all. I just want to know why this problem isn't going to exist next fall. And why, if we think we need to raise the money to solve it, why does it go away at the end of this school year? I think we have a sub problem, period. And I don't think it has to do with COVID. So that's my concern. And I don't think moving from 112 to 200 is the right move. Maybe 150, I don't know. Because I think whatever we do, we're going to have to continue to do it, or you're going to be having the same discussion sometime around Christmas next year.
Nikki, go ahead.
I'm with you on that, Jim. I've got similar concerns. I wish we had a magic checkbook that we could pay everybody what we wanted to pay them, but we simply don't. Part of me says, yes, could this solve the problem temporarily? Perhaps. There is nothing stopping Moorhead or West Fargo from raising theirs. It'll be, Fargo raised theirs. Well, now we're going to have to be competitive. And if they're paying for it with ESSER dollars, which if we were paying for it with ESSER dollars, I think it just creates a larger problem. But I do see coming back to next fall, I think Jim's right, it's longer term. So if I'm a substitute teacher and you're going to pay me 60, 80, whatever less next fall, well, why do I want to be here? I was worth more to you in the spring. You don't apparently care now. So I don't know that it might solve it short term. I don't discount that, and I would love to raise them. And my question would be, can we do something? Because we haven't changed it much in a fair amount of time. I'm just not sure that this big of a jump over the long haul, I think Jim's right. We need to find a way somehow to sustain it if we're going to do it, because I don't think we can pull that back and expect the same results. I just see it being a slippery slope.
Seth?
I completely agree on how difficult we can sunset it, but we're going to have the conversation, and it's very difficult to take something away once it's been given. I mean, there's a reason why, nationally, when there's any social program, it's fought really hard, because if it does get passed, it's very hard to take that back. The other thing with the sunset that I worry about is, so say we do 200 and we sunset it, and I know we all work for Fargo. I totally agree with you, David. We can't be necessarily concerned with what West Fargo and Moorhead are doing, but I think we still have to be conscious of it, because say we do this and then Moorhead and West Fargo are scrambling to find subs because we're almost doubling the pay. Now, what if they go forward and say, well, okay, we're not going to sunset it and we're going to pay 140? Well, if we sunset that and we pull that back and we go to 112, now we're in an even bigger pickle than we are right now if it comes to pay, because now we're way behind the curve. I know that's a lot of what ifs, but sometimes I think if you're going to make a decision this big, you have to kind of look at every single thing that could possibly happen or could not possibly happen. I think that's a possibility. Is it likely? Maybe not, but I think it is still a possibility, and I think it's something to consider. I'm all for this motion if those numbers behind the dollar sign are different.
Dr. Gandhi and then Jennifer.
I think part of the reason why, in my perception, this conversation is a great conversation, but it's also so challenging is because we all agree that there is a problem and we need to be able to hopefully find something to address the issues that we're having with unfilled substitutes right now within our district. And compensation can and should and has a pattern of being one of those influential factors. Now the matter of how we get there is where there might be some variance in it. So I would just ask the board, where do we want to put our dollars in terms of how we solve the problem? And I think that's going to lead to the solution. So with administration since 2020, you're not going to see a direct increase in the daily rate. That's correct for our regular subs. Where we invested trying to address the issue was in the bonus that was provided, the bonus structure. We modified that at the start of COVID, and the increased emphasis that we put on long-term subs. And we did that for two reasons, because like I said, compensation can solve the sub problem, but it's which solution do you want to use and how you want to align your dollars to your values. Every person, every staff member within our organization provides tremendous values to our students, but there are different expectations for those different responsibilities. Long-term subs do not have the ability to maybe choose which campuses they go to or drop assignments the morning of or have that autonomy of their schedule versus a daily sub. So for us, the investment of the same pot of dollars was better in increasing long-term subs because we knew that they were more committed individuals. There is an interim sub license required for the daily subs, but there's also different expectations for long-term subs who get paid on the teacher salary schedule. And yes, they do get benefits, and I think that's a good thing because they do have the credentialing. So it's what's the value of the degree and that teaching endorsement that long-term sub has had. So I think ultimately it comes down to, if we're comfortable with a pot of money, where does that pot of money go to? What's that solution? If this conversation, whatever happens with the board motion, administration will carry out the board's directive, but I think we would also continue conversations about looking at all of the structures. So looking at the in-house pay, because we know those are our teachers that are currently giving up their planning periods to serve students. We would also want to look at what we're doing with long-term subs. And if we're not able to get to 40, then we'd have a conversation about, okay, what is it different in the long-term structure? Is it the rules of the long-term sub? Do we allow long-term subs to do 3 days a week or 4 days a week? And I'm not saying that we do, but those are the conversations we would have, because administration would still prefer the more we can get the individuals that have a teaching credential and the degrees that are on the teaching schedule in front of our students. We think using the same pot of dollars would be better in that solution than maybe just the daily subs, because we know that we have that commitment. We know that they can go to the campuses where we need them. We know that assignments can't be dropped. So those are some of the conversations that we'd have. Now, if the board were to move forward with this motion, that's absolutely fine as well. I would just have some questions around, do we still continue the bonus that we're offering after every 12 completed days of work? What is the expectation on that? And then the only other piece I would also add is that with our long-term subs, in terms of the actual functions of the responsibilities as well, there's lesson planning, participating in the professional development. Those expectations are different, which we find of value as well too. So I don't think that there is a wrong answer to this solution. I think the question becomes, to which solution do we want to put our emphasis by putting the compensation behind? And I'm just going to advocate for our current staff that are doing it as well, because we do not want to neglect that group of individuals that already are going above and beyond as we look at that. So looking at the equity of pay across different staffing groups is important and just as paramount for us.
Jennifer?
Thank you. Okay, so a couple of comments. I see this as both short and long-term goals, which a few of you have talked about, and we've talked about sub shortages for a number of years, but it sounds like right now absences have increased, right? Combined classrooms have increased. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but the case numbers in terms of number of times that is happening, and I think that is, the reason for the immediacy here, and around what David is saying about let's do this for a short-term trial. At planning, I believe it was also mentioned that there is potentially an opportunity to pay through with ESSER dollars, but that also brings me to, I think that the comments around whether it's operational or not are overused. It's an overused objection because everything is operational. It's within the board's purview. We're supposed to help set the vision of the district, and budget priorities is one of those. And when we mention music, we just heard a fantastic presentation, but it also shared that we spend more and invest more in music education than any district across the nation. And so that lens, I'm using that as an example to say that is a board sort of vision, direction around setting budget priorities. So that is where we are supposed to play a role. So this, in my mind, is a conversation that belongs here because there is an immediate need. And if that means we have to shift priorities, that's why we're having these, tough conversations. So I wanted to say that. Then I also think about, okay, the challenges, but also the benefits. So if you're incentivizing someone and you do get this faster to fill rate for subs, that's a benefit for students. We solve that problem, or we learn that money isn't the only way, right? Or the only reason. We also give folks a chance. Maybe it is more appealing and they see what the district has to offer and they're here in the classroom and they decide, this is something actually I would like to do long term. And so I think that it opens doors, possibly, and I think we can't forget that possible benefit, As far as some of the discussion that was, again, in planning, we talked about, well, could we incentivize our in-house teachers maybe more? Maybe that's the $200 rate, and maybe outside subs $175, or whatever those numbers were, however they fall. Really then just to highlight the benefits, or for our in-house teachers, because that too is, those are the folks that those are the folks that the kids have relationships with, and there's certainly a benefit to keeping that consistent. So could that be something that we entertain within this conversation? And what would that look like? So I guess I support doing something, and I think that David's made some really compelling arguments in terms of it being done at the end of December. I think that with the proper, if that's the way that it's presented and that's the way folks understand it to be. Now, I don't think it's realistic that we are going to go back to 112, and that's where I come for the short term, long term. So we're trying to solve this problem long term as well. And so what is that number? It might not be 200, but it might be 150. But I do see it as, really two opportunities. And I don't think just because it's a long-term problem, I don't think that means we shouldn't maybe do something more significant short-term. And I do think that it would tell us a lot. Thank you.
David?
As the maker of this motion, it's become pretty obvious to me that it's going to fail. So I just want to leave you with a final thought. If we continue to pay our substitute teachers $112 a day, in essence, what we are telling those people is that the job they are doing for us is no more important than the job of flipping burgers, because they're getting the same amount of pay. I consider our substitute teachers grossly underpaid. I know that with the terrible shortage that we've had in subs, that I believe all of our administrators have stepped into a classroom for a day. I subbed for a semester, And it was the most harrowing experience of my life. It was so much more difficult than being an actual classroom teacher that I couldn't even explain it to you. The fact that these people are willing to come and sub at all is the kudos should go to those people. I don't know how I would thank them for the job they do, because it is a very, very difficult job. And to pay them the same amount of money that they could make at virtually every place that has a help wanted sign up, it's an insult. And if you are going to vote down this motion, I hope that someone will come back with a motion to show a significant increase and show these people that we value them.
Any other questions or comments from board members? I feel like no matter how this vote ends, that administration is hearing that we are deeply concerned about the need here, and I hope that it is, again, even though that this motion is about substitute pay, I hope that also administration hears and asks of us if there is need for board direction regarding the para pay situation. Because and we've had discussions about that here in this room as well. That's the individuals that serve as paras for our school district are doing work of, such important work as well. I mean, everyone in the school district is. So the challenge that I have with this is that it's about one set of needs for the district and in isolation versus a broader conversation. My wish would be to have a broader conversation regarding some of the staff where we're not negotiating the contract separate from contracted employees. Dr. Gandhi, did you have anything that you were planning to say?
Absolutely. I think administration hears the consensus on continuing to look at the substitute rates and compensation and see what we could do to continue tackling this, and that resolve is not going to change for us. To clarify, I think your question about looking at paras, I had a clarifying question about, are we talking about paraprofessionals that are the full-time employees, or are we talking about substitute paraprofessionals? While I do agree that all of this falls under the purview, if the board is going to start having us set expectations around looking at compensations for specific employee groups, I'm going to ask that conversation to go to planning. I still think that it's administrative purview, but looking at the practice of our district in terms of applying what's happening, doing market studies based on positions and analysis, and Doug can talk through what we do for those processes, but then also utilizing what's negotiated with the FEA as a mechanism for the compensation raises that all other staff receive. If we are going to start looking at pieces of information or employee groups in isolation and changing that practice, or that's the expectation of administration, we would want some guidance, because we would want to protect our own staff from how do you create a systemic approach to be able to do that, which is what we have now. So if we're going to change one thing, then what's the standard we're going to use to make those changes down the road? And I would love to share what our practice is now, but if that's going to be a board expectation, then that would be something the administration looks for as well.
And I was not talking about substitute paras when I made the comment, and this is a part of a broader conversation. So I'm not giving any direction, just sharing thoughts and feedback, and know that it's all part of a bigger conversation, and wanting all staff to know how appreciated they are, no matter how this motion goes. And I do feel like likely the best individuals to make this decision are those in administration, with the financial resources that are available to you. And that you're hearing this conversation, that we're deeply concerned. And, but that I feel administration knows the needs of where the holes are, better than, at least better than I do. And so I would ask that administration, and I believe that happens, that administration utilizes the finances available to you to make the decisions that you need to make, to whether that's raising that pay, or whether it's about the long-term, more permanent substitute situation. So I tend to not support the motion at this point, and would be open to a broader conversation. And Dr. Gandhi, like you said, if something ends up coming to planning, if you feel like you need more from the board, certainly ask us for it. Jennifer?
Can I just make a comment on that? I can appreciate, where you're coming from in terms of a broader conversation, budget priorities, but I do think this is something that needs to be addressed immediate. and the longer we push it to committee, the longer it takes to actually implement. And if it's an immediate problem we're trying to solve, we probably should get there faster. That's it.
Anne Marie, go ahead.
Johnson.
No.
Brian Nelson.
No.
Newman.
No.
Paulson.
Yes.
Benson.
Yes.
Gullickson.
No.
Holden.
No.
Knudsen.
No, motion fails. Are we okay to keep going? It's about 7:45. All right, the next item is B, Superintendent Evaluation. Memo 94 comes through the Governance Committee. It is the Superintendent Performance Monitoring Document. It is the summary that has been created from the individual monitoring reports that were provided for us to consider, and went to governance with the advice that a summary of those, the 8 reports, be created and presented to us for this evening. And so I was involved in putting that summary together with the direction of the Governance Committee, and the information is here for your consideration. Seth?
I move that the board approve the annual evaluation of the superintendent indicating satisfactory performance, and place a copy of the report in the superintendent's personnel file.
Is it second? Second by Nikki, okay. Seth, back to you. You made the motion.
I don't really have anything to clarify on that. I just wanted to make the motion so that we can get the discussion rolling if anybody else has any comments or questions.
Thank you, Seth. Anyone have comments or questions? Jennifer, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, I gathered a document and sent it out to all of you, just as an FYI that I would be sharing tonight. And that is specifically related to Ndsba's guidance on superintendent evaluation. And you will find in that document specifically under North Dakota law, that all superintendents, which we all know this, must receive 2 written performance reviews each year based, and here's what's important, based on job description and any other performance standards established by the board. So one thing that we don't currently include is job description, right? Ours are written responses, like just tell us your strengths, tell us things that your superintendent needs to work on, things like that. So that's one area. Each board member should individually evaluate the superintendent. Individually. Okay, 2 governance meetings ago, maybe more actually, it was decided at governance that would no longer be the process. That the process would be governance committee gets to decide which comments to include, which comments, which ratings, things like that. So they literally excluded many, well, all of mine and some others. So it's going against what is actually required from us by law. So the way I see this is we can't accept the way that this is written because these aren't individual comments. So violation number 1. Individual comments by each board member should be compiled into one collective evaluation from prior to discussion. Okay, and then it goes on to say any discrepancies among board members about the superintendent's rating in any of the performance areas evaluated should be discussed in the open meeting, and then a decision reached by a roll call vote. So again, if you don't agree with some of the comments that that are placed on a superintendent evaluation, you can vote no, and the superintendent can also provide a written response to those and have those added to his file. But it's still, again, this is what is stated in law. This is what is coming from Ndsba, which is telling us how to do this. So it also says the board should not give the superintendent an overall rating. So again, that goes back to really how are we rating him based on job description and any other parameters? And so that really it's set up and designed where our ELs are supposed to be helping us do this along the way, right? And that is really how you compile an evaluation. I mean, think about really in your world of your careers and how you're formally evaluated. That's generally how it is done, right? And so it becomes clear for the superintendent and also for the board in terms of what are the expectations, what are you evaluating him on, and then it won't be a surprise at the end of the day, right? So I think that we're not doing that, and I think that this particular document that is on our agenda we cannot approve because it does not follow these guidelines and outlined in the law, state statute. That's it.
Thank you. Jim, go ahead.
Jennifer, and thank you for sending out what you did earlier today, and I did read it. I actually have a copy of it right here. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying, because when you referenced on page 26, individual comments from each board member should be compiled on one collective evaluation form, so on and so forth. This is not state law, right? What you were reading there was not
This
state
is law and their interpretation of their intent in the law.
Yeah, but this is not the state law, though, correct?
What do you mean this is not the state law? You can read it right here, Jim. They talk about North Dakota law.
Yeah, well, I'm reading what you shared, and I'm just saying that's not actually in statute, right?
This is exactly what Ndsba, so are you saying Ndsba is misinterpreting the law?
No, I'm saying you just referred to this document as the law.
I read it.
I just wanted to make sure we understood this is not the law.
I read it, Jim, so you can interpret it in a different way.
I've read it as well. I just want to make sure you understand what state statute is versus guidance from
It is their interpretation of the law. And don't we seek interpretation from Ndsba on many laws?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So are you saying this one you just are just going to disregard?
No, I just don't think you've quite interpreted the paragraph you were reading.
I disagree with you.
But that's a different story.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify, this is not state statute.
I read you state statute.
All right, I'm just looking at BSR 5, which BSR 5 and 5E spells out the board policies and the procedures for conducting the annual evaluation of the superintendent, which it is required under Century Code that the board does evaluate the superintendent. So the policy is our board's way of evaluating and following through with what Century Code requires and what the board has agreed to follow in order to meet Century Code. We have discussed this, and I'll ask Tara for her interpretation, or I'm going to share with you my understanding of what her interpretation is and ask her if she'd like to share anything individual or in addition. But on the second page of BSR 5, in the middle section that talks about what the evaluation document consists of. And I know we've reviewed this before, which is why we have the combined document in front of us for consideration today. And item D under that says that it will be a summary of the superintendent's strengths and weaknesses relative to achievements of the results, policies, and operations within the boundaries established in the executive limitations policies. And that item, and then farther up, item B talks about that the document will consist of conclusions based upon the board's prior action during the year relative to whether each result has been achieved or whether reasonable progress has been made toward its achievement. So that it's a document that is not made up of all of the individual responses, but it's a document that it's a conclusionary document based upon the individual responses, which is why the last time we conducted the superintendent evaluation and this time we have this combined document. So I just want to remind us of that, and then Tara, ask you if my understanding is correct and if you have anything additional to say.
Yeah, so I would offer the point of clarification. So North Dakota Century Code, specifically section 15.1-14-03, is incredibly vague with regards to what's required for a superintendent's evaluation. It requires 2 evaluations throughout the year, and it requires the board to provide a satisfactory or unsatisfactory rating and put that into the personnel file. It at no point in time says that every individual board member must review it. It says nothing with regard to how that process is done. How this board handles that is based on its governance structure. So its governance structure says that throughout the year, the board will go through the individual or the evaluation processes. And then it will provide the summation of those twice a year. The other thing that I want to clarify is with regard to the Ndsba guidance. So I did have the opportunity to reach out to Ndsba today to explain how the Fargo Public School District handles its superintendent evaluation and to ask them if their interpretation of how we perform our evaluation is inconsistent with the language that they have in this document. And in that conversation with Ndsba's counsel, she did indicate that the way that we are doing our process is consistent with their best practices and recommendations. And so based on what I have been told from Ndsba and based on my interpretation of state law, I would say that this evaluation process is both consistent with state law and Ndsba's recommended practices.
And there is also a deadline that this evaluation needs to be completed by, according to Century Code. David, go ahead.
I'm reading directly from Century Code, and it said each board member shall individually evaluate the superintendent. The board president shall give an evaluation instrument to each board member prior to evaluation deadline. Board members are required to rate the superintendent's performance as either satisfactory or unsatisfactory in each area of performance identified in the job description. And then it goes on to say, just as Jennifer just read to us, individual comments from each board member shall be compiled onto one collective evaluation form prior to discussion of the evaluation at an open meeting. That is from Century Code. That's not North Dakota School Boards Association. I'm reading directly from Century Code.
I do want to clarify, are you reading from the document provided by the North Dakota School Board Association?
No, I'm on the...
Because this is the Century Code. Yeah, what Century Code section are you referencing in particular?
I am on superintendent evaluation.
Is there a Century Code number that you can reference, David?
I'm pulling it up to the beginning to see where it's taking this from.
And while he's looking for that, if I just may add, so Tara shared that whomever she spoke to at Ndsba is in direct conflict of what their own document says, word for word. I mean, I'm reading from their document. So I guess for me to accept that, I would need to see that in writing, that is exactly, because it's the opposite of what their guidance is.
I would be happy to provide you with an email from her confirming that our process is consistent with state law.
And how did she say then our process of really not, I mean, how does she explain the inconsistencies of individual comments be compiled and added onto a summary report? That's not what we're doing. We used to do that, but just recently we changed.
So the statement that I would make is they're saying all of the individual board members will complete an evaluation. That happened. Every board member was given an evaluation and asked to complete it. Those documents were taken, compiled into a single document, given to all of the other board members in the governance committee, and the governance committee directed the board president to issue consistent themes that will speak for the majority of the board. And that is consistent with the guidance from Ndsba, is that the ultimate evaluation that goes into the superintendent's file has to be the position of the majority of the board.
So that's exactly the problem right there, because that would, you skipped a whole step because governance has 5 members. So 5 members just made a decision on behalf of the full board. And that is exactly what is happening that shouldn't be happening. That right in her document and how she heard that is the full board really weighed in on it. All board members, no, 5 did. So it doesn't matter that it's the majority. The committee took position on behalf of the full board, which is against even our own policies.
What we have the ability.
What position did the committee take?
The committee, she just said the committee directed the president to take common themes. The full board did not. It doesn't matter that it's the majority, Jim, because they shouldn't be 5 members. A committee should not be doing that.
Okay,
You know that,
I would say
right?
that if those themes are available, the information is available for us here. We have followed our policies. We are following Century Code. As a board, we have agreed to these policies. As a board, we know that all of us are to be completing the evaluation. Okay, 8 of us did. And we have the information in terms of the themes in front of us this evening to decide on. If, and this is the meeting of the full board, if there is not agreement on the themes and the information that is presented, the vote can go in a different way. The board here, all of us that are present, have the ability to vote on the memo. That's why it's here in front of us, is for us to have this conversation to decide, do we agree with the information that's presented to us or do we not? So every board member has the opportunity to reflect their thoughts on that through their vote. David.
Tara, I owe you an apology. I pulled up, I'm looking here at Century Code 15.1-14-01. And I'm reading it, and then right below it, it says superintendent selection, evaluation, and non-renewal. And when I looked further, that is referencing a North Dakota School Boards Association evaluation instrument. It is not Century Code. It's listed on the top under Century Code, but they pull it up separately.
Thank you for the clarification. Anne Marie?
Just for the record, I'd note that the superintendent evaluation is noted in Century Code under 15.1-14-03. That's the section that stipulates, so 15.1-14-03, school district superintendent evaluation. That's that section. It has subpoints 1 through 4.
Yes, that's what's in our policy. Nikki and then Brian.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that the booklet that Ndsba puts out, they do so because every school district within North Dakota isn't organized the same way that we are. In fact, less are organized than we are. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to help demonstrate how this can be done. So it isn't necessarily, I guess I don't interpret it as law. When I've had conversations with them, they are offering guidance to those that want to develop these systems because they don't currently exist. Because we are a bigger district, we have different resources available, and we are where we need to be, if not beyond, with regard to Century Code and laws. So it's meant as a guidance document. Doesn't mean it can't differ, but for those that don't have it, it's a path they can use to create it.
Brian? Excuse me, David. Oh, no. Brian?
Finally, I get to speak. So knowing this well, 26 years of being evaluated as a superintendent, I know this particular law quite well. My question was, and I think you've answered it, was everybody had the chance to evaluate the superintendent, but only 8 did, correct? Okay.
I would, go ahead.
And this is our meeting. This is our open meeting right now. The one thing about being a superintendent, both in December and March, is you get to be evaluated in public, unlike a teacher, a para, a principal, and everybody else. It's a little different. And looking at the work that Dr. Gandhi's done with his team, who he always mentions, I think they've done quite well. And I think the evaluation says it. When you look at what we were measuring and looking, when you fill out the evaluation, this has been a process that's been going on all year. This just didn't happen overnight. This has been going since July. It really has. And if you look at it and read it, I know this. I've done this for 26 years. This is what we do.
We've used most of our time to talk about the process that this evaluation has gone through. We haven't talked at all about the information that is in the report, which I feel is sad. The majority of the board, in fact, to start out with it, there were literally no comments, no specific comments, no specific suggestions regarding that would reflect weaknesses or specific suggestions for improvement, Dr. Gandhi. Thank you so much for what you have been giving to us this past year and your staff. And I want to lead with that there were no specific suggestions. That doesn't mean that there aren't. Obviously there are improvements that happen and new things all along the way, right? But there was nothing that stood out, that was glaring, that needed attention. And in fact, the comments were about exemplary performance, outstanding leadership, thinking outside of the box, engaging with community, engaging with our stakeholders, specifics regarding the plan to use ESSER funds, talking about ways to address teacher burnout, morale, and staff shortages. Doesn't say that it's all been done, but talking about it, utilizing the town halls, open communication with the Fargo Education Association. When Dr. Gandhi has questions related to policies, he brings them to the board for clarification. So the items that I'm reading here are specific statements that were in the monitoring document that was completed by the 8 board members. These aren't my own words here. This is a combination of all of our work. So following examples of Dr. Gandhi's strengths: attentiveness and commitment to adhering to all executive limitations, policies, and desired results as he and his cabinet make decisions as to what is best for the district's students and staff. And overall, the statements of, we are so pleased with his service that we would like it to continue. So I want us to lead with that. I hope that if anything gets picked up from this conversation, that's what it is. We have a superintendent that is exemplary, and we have staff that is exemplary because of the leadership that Dr. Gandhi provides to the district. Brian?
And I'm going to add another thing. As an elected official, as a board member, you have 2 jobs as a board member, and that's to hire and fire the superintendent, and you're to set policies. And you're given the opportunity to evaluate the superintendent, and you don't take that chance in that evaluation, you don't fill it out, only 8 did. You let down the people of this that pay taxes in this district. And you let Dr. Gandhi down too, whoever did. I have no idea who it is. It's public knowledge, people will find out. But you've let him down too, because he's an employee of this district that deserves to see if he's doing a job or not. I mean that.
Jennifer.
So again, I will mention a few governance committee meetings ago, when we did submit evaluations, I will tell you, mine was completely eliminated. So you tell me, how do you get your comments to come to the full board discussion as they should? And are you really telling me that have you ever met a person that doesn't have any sort of developmental opportunities? Ever? They're all strengths? Just because you identify a development opportunity doesn't take away from the strengths that the superintendent has. And yes, Brian, we are obligated to do it, and we all do it until we're censured. So, I mean, it is irresponsible of all of us not to identify things that we can improve on. Because if we are not identifying and have those hard conversations, we are never getting better. We are status quo. We're going backwards. That's where our responsibility lies. And if you look at my review, you'll see, discuss any areas that deserve superintendent redirection or increased emphasis. Did any of these comments make it to here? No. It is accountability for decisions, increased focus on data-driven improvement plans, achieving desired results for students, increased attention to desired results, right? Conversations we should be having more than once a year. I mean, they should be at every single agenda. Listen to your state superintendent. That's what she says. Oh,
Jim.
I'm not quite done yet. Creating defined results, accountability. Our own results policies do not define what it is we are to measure and if we are making progress on those things. We don't do it. Compare it to others. We don't do it. So again, that's something that our superintendent should also embrace, because that is how we know the plans that he has put in place are actually working. We decide, we set, right? The vision, the direction, progress, certainly, student achievement, absolutely, right? That's at the core of everything that we do, everything, or it should be. And they should, the administration, we don't tell them how to do it, right? But we tell them, this is what we're going to measure. And they get to come to us and say, we met it or we didn't, right? We're not doing that within our own results policies. We're not holding them accountable. So the areas that I have identified for that are within this, which get eliminated and never talked about. And that's not just his fault, that's our fault. Because we're not doing our job. That's how you move from good to great.
Jim.
On that note, and just to try to take the whole stress level out of this room, I want to thank Dr. Gandhi for the service he's given us this last year, and I'd like to call previous question on this topic.
Is there a second? Anne Marie, go ahead.
So just to clarify, you are voting on previous question, which would close debate immediately on this topic?
Yes.
Brian Nelson.
Yes.
Newman.
Yes.
Paulson.
Yes.
Benson. Gullickson.
Yes.
Holden.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Knutson.
Yes, motion passes.
So now we are voting on acceptance of the superintendent evaluation. Newman.
Yes.
Paulson.
No.
Benson.
No.
Gullickson.
Yes.
Holden.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Brian Nelson.
Yes.
President Knutson.
Yes, motion passes. The next item is Memo 95. It is the Ad hoc Superintendent Contract Committee. Every time the contract is needing to be reviewed for the superintendent, an ad hoc committee is formed. It's specified that the president is to name 3 members for the ad hoc committee and to also select a chair. I'll inform you that the 3 individuals that are on the memo have indicated that they have the ability, the time to serve on the committee. So I offer this information to you for consideration. Jim.
I'd like to move that we approve an ad hoc committee of Robin Nelson, Seth Holden, and Tracy Newman, with Robin Nelson serving as the chair, to meet with Dr. Gandhi to review the superintendent's contract and propose any changes at the April 12th board meeting.
Second.
Seconded by Brian. Jim, anything else on your end?
Nope.
Okay. Any discussion? Go ahead, Anne Marie, call the roll.
Newman,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Benson,
No.
Gullickson,
Yes.
Holden,
Yes.
Johnson, Brian Nelson,
Yes.
Knutson,
Yes, motion passes. Item D and items D and E were moved from consent agenda to business. Item D is the memo regarding GP 12 changes. That also comes from governance, and the proposed language is there, item 5, which reflects conversation that happened at governance and is there for your consideration. And Jennifer, I know you were one that asked to have actually both of the items pulled, so if there's anything that you would like to speak to, go ahead, but we need a motion too.
Okay. So I would just like to start off by saying, really to remind us about the Carver policy governance that we all really entered into and had a work session on. And I want to quote from that. There should be healthy, even passionate disagreement on a board in order for it to presume to be representing diversity in ownership. So disagreement is a blessing, not a blockage. And as I listened to the governance meeting and the governance debate around this proposed change, and even the most recent several events over the last, I don't know, year or more, the desire to censure and to limit and to shut down conversations that don't align with your own, or even of the majority of the board, I don't understand. It is not in alignment with governance. It is not healthy. It is not representative of this community. It is wrong for a lot of reasons. And so I just thought the simplest way was to take you back to, if you really believe that, we should be operating under a governance model, well, that should resonate then with you. And I would urge you then not to approve, removing people from committees. I mean, we're elected to do a job, and we might not always agree. That's okay. We should welcome that. Like Carver actually says, it's a blessing, not a blockage. I think healthy debate should be encouraged, and we are not doing that as a board. We are not. We are seeking to silence people. And I think that's a dangerous precedent, and I think we've done it in a couple of other examples, and I hope that we work hard to undo it, because it's not where we get to be our best. It's not how we, if we're not fostering the collection of ideas or other ideas outside of our own, how are we growing? And so I would really encourage all of you to reconsider this recommendation and remove it from this policy.
Seth, I saw your hand up, and then David.
Well, this is business item, so I'm going to make a motion that we approve GB 12 as presented.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Second by
And then I would
Tracy.
also,
Go ahead, Seth.
I hope that you're not confusing thought from action. because we've been here since 5:30 and we spent a ton of time debating on whether or not we agree on what we're going to do about substitute teachers. I don't think that this change in policy has anything to do with thought, differencing of thought, or anything like that. It has to do with actions. Because we're not going to censure or go through the further process if this passes because of a difference in opinion. We're going to do it based upon if one of our board members decides to not follow any policy, whether or not they agree with that policy or not. That's what this is about. It's not about silencing opinion. It is about curbing behavior breaking policy. That is what this is about.
David, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that debate because we've had it many, many times. I just like to point out that number 5, which says removal by the board from any leadership or committee positions to which the offending member has been appointed or elected. If there's somebody that you don't want on a committee, the president appoints all committees. And in response to somebody's question out there from the audience earlier, they asked why certain individuals weren't on governance committee. You only serve on governance if you're chair of another committee, and the chairs are also appointed by the president. So the president controls this without any more additions to this process for addressing board member violations. I think I don't think there's any value or any purpose to put this in.
The president appoints and approves by the board. So the president appoints based on interest in serving on committees and presents that information in a memo for a board meeting for the full board to consider. So the board also has the opportunity to not approve those assignments. Seth, go ahead, and then Nikki and Brian, did you both have just Brian? Okay, go ahead, Seth.
I would actually argue, David, in the interest of democracy, that if we do have this policy, the 9 of us have to vote on whether or not we're going to remove someone from a committee. I'm not comfortable just allowing our president to do that. If someone's going to violate a policy and they're going to be removed from a committee, I want the 9 of us to decide if that's going to happen, not just the president.
And the way the language is right now, it says removal by the board, which would mean at a meeting of the full board. Brian?
Thank you, Seth. You explained that very well. I appreciate that. And this affects me as well, number 5. So you can better believe I'm going to follow the policy because I represent the people out here in Fargo. And I want to be able to represent them in everything that we can or that I can. So I'm going to follow the policy.
The information in front of us is not about blocking or silencing. It is about what happens when board members decide to not follow the policies that the board has set for itself to operate under. So it's not about if we agree with someone's point of view or not, if we agree with how someone voted, with something that is brought up for discussion at a committee meeting. It's not about that. It's about the policies that the board has said we are following. And so the 5th item is to the point of saying, well, if a board member has decided that they're just not going to follow a certain set of policies after a period of time, that the board has the opportunity that this is something that's available to the board to consider. I don't mean opportunity and just, you know, without serious consideration. That's why it comes in front of the full board. And that's actually why the governance committee discussed, if we are to add this, does it come before censure or does it come after censure? It was discussed at governance to place it after censure. It is also not really being suggested with the idea that, in fact, I don't think any of these, except for maybe number 1, are really here with the idea that, well, we're going to implement these steps because we're going to change behavior. The idea with number 1 is you have that conversation in a private setting, and a board member likely says, oh, I didn't realize that. That's right, I forgot, and you know, I'm going to work on that again. Thanks for the reminder. The other steps are more direct. That's where the board ends up saying, we're more concerned that we are not following our policies, that a board member is not following policy. And when we serve on a board, and when you run for the board, and you get elected to the board, part of being elected to the board is the responsibility of following the policies that are here in front of us. It's a little bit different than some other areas of elected service. It's different even from the city commission. It's even different from legislative work. So this board happens to have a set of policies that it's decided that it is going to operate under. And so we're all responsible for operating under these policies unless we change them to a way that we say we don't need to. Currently, we say we need to follow these policies. And I also wanted to mention that there was some discussion previously about additional language to this policy. One had to do with, talked about pay. And really there's a stipend, you know, that we get as board members, and we review that annually, and that has not changed for many years. There was a discussion about, would that stipend maybe be changed? At governance, the consensus was, no, we don't want to have, that's not something that we want to further for conversation. There were also some steps that were included that could follow underneath number 5 to make the process of number 5 a little bit more rigorous. That was also discussed at governance. And that governance committee decided, no, we want to stick with the information that's in front of you for consideration today. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because it has been discussed externally in the media about some other options that we might be considering tonight. And I want people to understand that the only piece after governance talked was the one in front of us tonight. So we are not talking about adding additional steps under 5 to make the process more rigorous, and we're not talking about changing a stipend. We're only talking about the language that's in front of us. David.
Could I just get a clarification on how long we're looking at? Are we looking at the remainder of the year, because committee assignments are made every July? Are we looking at the remainder of the year or for the remainder of that person's term? Because it does not state that.
I'm glad you asked that, and I was wondering about that as well. The way I read this, because David, like you said, committee assignments are made for an annual basis, I read this as following within that committee assignment. So within that year's time frame. Because there's an opportunity every cycle to really reset committees and committee assignments. And censure too, for example, number 4 was censure. That's a one-time thing. That doesn't mean it can't happen again. Censure can be repeated more than once. It's not just, well, we would hope that would be a one-time deal. Does everyone else read number 5 to be within the year's time frame, and that it would reset upon new committee assignments? Okay. Was there someone else that had, Jennifer, go ahead.
So I have a question for you all to consider. We're elected and we are accountable to the citizens who elected us. What if your policy inhibits that, gets in the way of that? We can't do the job we were elected to do. We should be asking ourselves that question, right? Because aren't you told we can't remove board members, right, within North Dakota? And the answer usually given is that happens at the polls. You can vote them out, right? So shouldn't really our policies be designed to do the job that we're elected to do, not keep us from doing the job that we're elected to do? I mean, the citizens put us here. So it goes back to what is our focus? Our focus should be about the students, right? And the vision of the district, not about punishing each other because we think we should for violation of some policy we don't necessarily agree with or whatever. The citizens put us here to do a job. Consider that as you place more restrictions on each one of us. And remember, the role could be reversed in the future. It could be. So please think about that too.
The policies provide us a way to do our work as elected officials. Again, it's the way that the board has decided to operate. Any other discussion? Did you have a hand up, Tracy?
Yeah. I just wanted to say, I attended the work session and I appreciated the thoughtful dialogue that went into that. And to be clear, I mean, you have to start at the top every time. So no one's jumping to number 5. We're going to, if there's an offense, you would follow step 1 and then step 2 and to get there. And when we compared this to other districts, including our neighboring districts, they all had a very similar thing. In fact, theirs was higher. This step came before censure for many of them, if I recall. And some of the Minnesota ones we looked at, actually, the final step was removal of a board member if there was a majority vote. So I feel like this is reasonable. It's not unique to Fargo. This is what this was a very common theme that we found in almost all the ones that we reviewed. Another thing at discussion outside of the pay that came up was restricting a board's member ability to attend conferences at either the state level or national level. And I think that we made the right call in not including that because that is how someone gets better and that's professional development. And we didn't want to take away a right for someone to develop or learn more about being a school board member. So we did weigh many, many options. And I think this is very reasonable. And you'd have to go through a lot of steps to even reach this point.
In conversation with Amy DeCock at Ndsba, the suggestions that were even in front of governance and then prior to that in front of the board at the work session resulted, so we've been talking about this for quite some time. You know, we got to the point where we decided this is important enough that we need to take this to a work session and devote time to that. And Amy DeCock and I visited with her and really wanting to make sure that any of the suggestions that we were to entertain at that work session were ones that fell within Century Code, that were ones that fell within, that made it so that as an elected official, we weren't violating anything with Century Code. If anything was going to be discussed, I didn't want us to be discussing anything that really we wouldn't even be able to move forward on because of a violation of Century Code. So I'm confident with the information that was presented at the work session that it falls within Century Code. Visited with Tara about it as well following the conversation with Amy DeCock. So I'm confident in the information that was discussed at the work session, that it went to governance, that governance vetted it and has brought it back here, has actually limited the information to potentially be added to GP 12 from a quite long list of considerations. Any other discussion, questions? Anne Marie, please call the roll.
Paulson,
No.
Benson,
No.
Gullickson? Yes.
Holden,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Brian Nelson,
Yes.
Newman,
Yes.
President Knutson.
Yes, motion passes. The last item under business is GP 3E change, and Jennifer, you requested that that be moved. Would you like to take that?
Oops. Let me just pull it up here just a minute. Okay, so the suggested change is under school board ethics, number 2. Honest and sincere, okay, so school board members should be committed to high quality education for every student. Number 2, honest and sincere, having the courage of their convictions and always voting their beliefs. That's what it currently says. The suggested change is honest and sincere, having the courage of their convictions and always voting for or against what they understand to be in the best interest of the district. So again, I go back to who are the customers, right? And what is our role in terms of advocacy for the district and setting a vision. And I think that, let me find my note here. In the document that I had sent you, there's also a paragraph, and I told myself to refer to it, but I closed it. So just give me a second here to collect my thoughts. Advocacy is championing the vision, the shared vision, right? And there's examples of it on page 14 within your toolkit. So I won't read them all at this moment, but I think it's important, again, for you to recognize that if you put these words in here, the best interest of the district, you're really taking away the ability for someone to really share their convictions or always voting, or it goes back to, well, we can't put on an EL any negative comment, or we can't, any sort of identify any sort of opportunity for growth or policy that might violate something. It just, I don't like the way that it is worded, because I think that we're all here really trying to do what we believe is best in the best interest of students. And so I think that it should really say students or your customers. Who are your customers? Your students, your constituents, your staff. So I would like you to reconsider that. And I think that their beliefs sort of maybe captured that better than trying to be so restrictive. Again, so I'd like you to reconsider. I'd like to hear what your justification was for changing it in the first place.
Anyone else have discussion?
Yeah, this is a business item,
Go
so
ahead,
I'd like
Seth.
to move that the board approve GP 3E as presented.
Is there a second? Seconded by Nikki? Okay.
And this was
Go
my
ahead, Seth.
proposed change, so I will clarify some things for you. Jennifer, if you'd like. I don't quite understand why, what your exact problem is with the language. We're board members of the Fargo Public School District. The district in this case means students, staff, teachers, everybody in the community that lives in this school district, because education, public education, is a public good. It is a public service. Everyone, regardless whether or not they have children in the district or they teach in the district, all benefit from positive outcomes of public education. That's why the wording says the best interest of the district. Students are included in that. Everybody is included in the district. The reason why I had a problem with the idea of belief in that is that beliefs cannot really be challenged, and someone's beliefs could not be in the best interest of the district. And we're supposed to be voting for what the information that is presented to us by those that we ask to present information to us, and make decisions based upon that, not based upon your beliefs. Case in point, I've been accused publicly for supporting critical race theory, but not once have I ever publicly supported it. And if there was ever a motion to support it here, that might not be in the best interest of the district. And so I would vote against my belief because I would want to do what's in the best interest of the district, not what I necessarily always believe. And that's the reason for the change.
David?
That's the reason for my suggestion of the change.
David?
I'm not going against anything that Seth is saying. I'm just wondering, is there any real difference in what we're saying here? I mean, my beliefs are based on what I understand. I don't really know that we've reworded it and changed the actual feeling of the sentence. I don't see that I necessarily have any problem with the wording that's been proposed. I just don't see how it's really clearing anything up from what was there before.
Jennifer?
Thank you. So maybe this will help with it. I'm going to quote from Carver again, because it might provide the clarity. So, cast your vote according to your best judgment as to what will be in the best interest of the ownership, not the CEO or even the board. I like that better, I think, than saying even the district, because you're better defining it, right? You're saying the ownership, the staff, the students, the constituents, and not, because you could, I mean, how do you define the district? Does that mean the CEO? Does that mean the board? So is it limiting? And so that's why I was seeking your clarification and your reasoning, right? Because like David said, what's the difference if we're saying our beliefs or the district? I think this quote from Carver, governance policy, actually could help better get to what you're saying. Because I think this is what you said, but that's not how it's worded. Would you agree this is what you said?
I mean, yeah, the district still really contains every single stakeholder that lies within the Fargo Public School District. And that means everybody who is employed, that means everybody who attends classes, and that means everybody that actually even includes everybody that's not even eligible to vote in the district. Because if you have somebody that's 4 years old, they're still a stakeholder in this district, because they might not be able to vote and they might not be in school, but the decisions that we make are going to affect them in the future. And even people that are retired are still affected by public education, because public education is a public good. The district is everybody within the district. We should be making the policy decisions that strengthen the school district, which is I guess I don't understand why that's a problem.
Anyone else have?
For clarity on the district, right?
I think the clarity has been provided.
No, I mean, in terms of written words.
By you, Seth. Oh, anyone else have questions? Nikki?
I just would want to call the question. Let's please
Second.
just move on.
Tracy, did you second it? Okay. Anne Marie, excuse me, all in favor signify by saying yes? Yes.
I need to call the roll.
No, we don't need to do that right now, do we? We need a roll call from Anne Marie. Go ahead, Anne Marie.
So we're voting on previous questions and the debate on this current topic.
Yes.
Benson.
No.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
No.
Thank you.
Gullickson.
Yes.
Holden.
Yes.
Johnson. Yep. Brian Nelson.
Yes.
Newman.
Yes.
Paulson.
Yes.
Knutson.
Yes. Go ahead, Anne Marie.
Gullickson.
Yes.
Holden.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Brian Nelson.
Yes.
Newman.
Yes.
Paulson.
Yes.
Benson.
No.
Knutson.
Yes, motion passes. Board reports, committee liaison and correspondence reports. Nikki, do you have anything pertinent? David, go ahead.
just ask me first? I've got a meeting at 9 o'clock.
Go ahead, and Seth, I know you
I'm like
needed to leave
45
too.
minutes past when I'm supposed to be.
You are. Seth, you go ahead, and then David.
Okay, I'm super quick. Last week, I believe we had our last salary commission meeting, and report will be forthcoming soon. So that is all I have, and we'll see you.
Thank you, Seth. David.
And the only thing I want to bring up is I serve on the Leave Bank Committee, and Doug can help me with this, but we just approved our 23rd request. We have got to be out of days, aren't we, Doug?
Not for teachers.
Let me check quick here.
We, in that 200 days, though, that we set.
Yeah, but a lot of those 200 days went for people that aren't under the certified contract. So we have plenty of days left for teachers.
Dr. Gandhi, did you have anything that you needed to add on that regard? I know you sent out information to board members about that.
Yeah, just said Jim covered it.
Sounds good. Rupak, would you like to give a brief synopsis?
Yeah, I had shared some, I had sent an update to the board, the 200 bank, Doug will give you the current numbers, that we use a combined bank, but when we, differentiated who was on the, represented by the negotiated agreement or not, there was still significant room, so we were not close to the threshold at the point that I updated the board. Doug can give you current numbers.
We currently have 117 and a half days in the teacher-specific leave bank.
Okay, so what bank do the others that we've been approving come from?
Dr. Gandhi, go ahead.
It's always been one bank, but the way that we interpret the negotiated agreement, which actually was favorable for those represented and for the board for the purpose of not reopening it, is that those represented by the contract get 200. So moving forward, and Doug and Jackie's team are going through a significant overhaul of our accounting software, but moving forward, we would be looking at two separate banks. We're using one bank right now, but we do interpret what was negotiated to mean that the teacher should exclusively have 200. So we view that anything else outside of that, whether it's adding or not for other staff, would be in the administrative purview because it's not something that's negotiated, but there is still a significant amount. I think 117 is what Doug just said for the teachers.
Thank you, David. Nikki, go ahead.
February 16th, I met with the FPS Foundation at their board meeting. I'm happy to say that Giving Hearts Day was good to them, so that was wonderful. February 22nd, we had a canceled board meeting thanks to a snowstorm. February 23rd, Davies Parent Teacher Conference. I thanked the teachers. I appreciated the opportunity to engage with them one-to-one. February 24th, attended governance. February 25th, I listened into the planning meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Brian.
I finished with Seth on the MOU with salary. And then we also finished up with the calendar. I believe we'll be bringing that forward. As I understand, it's probably record time. So we'll see. I like it. It's going to be a nice calendar.
Jim.
Just a couple things. Planning obviously met. You saw some of our work on substitute pay. We heard that we're running into slight delays on the Hawthorne Early Childhood Special Ed Edition, working out some issues with the city. So we're probably not going to be in the ground this spring with that project, probably going to be looking at a year down the road. And we also just looked at maybe potentially doing some bond refunding to save some long-term interest costs for the district. Health Insurance Committee met. We got our year-end report, and either we are just really, really good at forecasting what we should be charging our employees in the district, or magic math happened because we just about spent 100% of the money we collected. Literally, we're talking on almost $19 million, a $6,000 variance between revenue and expenditures. So the committee did a pretty good job of figuring out what we needed to be charging people, or maybe somebody else in this room had something to do with it. I don't know. Obviously, we're also looking at what we can do to hold down future costs, but provide a quality benefit to our employees going forward. SEEC had a board meeting since we last met as well. Got an update on our move to our new location. I think they're going to be probably moving this week, at least some of the staff over there, if I'm not mistaken. And we looked at our Cognia report, which had come back, generally speaking, with some pretty good remarks and overall positive recommendations for the SEEC. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Jim. Jennifer?
Okay, so yes, I was at planning and I called in for governance, and one of the comments or questions I guess I'm looking for some clarity around is the discussion around student exit surveys. And so I know that, or at least my interpretation of what was said is that the current questions on there maybe some weren't seeing as relevant or helpful in terms of how we utilize the data that we've gotten, or wasn't. So was the direction, or really is it going to come to the board to decide what sort of data we are wanting from to learn from our students? Or did we say it is okay to just stop doing the student exit survey? Because if that's the case, I would just like to say, I think that's a mistake, because it is certainly one of our customer groups that we, at the communications committee, look for ways to additionally to engage. And so if the current exit survey isn't providing useful, maybe there are just other questions that we could come up with that would be useful information. And so I would urge us to really continue that conversation rather than end that report. I was looking for clarification on the weather day policy that was also discussed at governance, but I think Rupa kind of touched on it, because the intent at our work session a number of months ago versus the intent being discussed, I just was looking for clarity. And I think if I understand correctly, it's the first, if there are 2 days, the intention would be board direction on the policy would be, those would be made up in person, and anything after that would really be the decision of the superintendent to make around whether it's virtual or in person. So if I'm wrong on that, please chime in. But I've gotten a lot of questions from the community on, why is ours different than other districts? What is our policy? How do we interpret this policy? So I was just seeking to, one more time, like it be clear. And then there was, let's see, I attended Community Development Committee meeting, and there was also a desire and approval for a subcommittee, really kind of, they had a 5-year plan to begin with, and so this subcommittee is really taking it's charged with looking at, like, we don't have bylaws, so can we create bylaws, and what does that look like, and what is the overarching, like, community need, as well as how do these pieces all fit together, who all comes to the table, sort of an opportunity to identify best practices or best models. And so I'm really excited about this opportunity, this community, like this committee, and where it's going to go from here, and what that might look like, because the city has done a really great job they've got a lot of data. They've put surveys and really done some research, and it's all kind of coming in right now. And so to use all of those and put this together for a big overarching plan is an exciting time. So I think that's all of my updates.
Tracy?
Thank you. I appreciated Ms. Renfro's report tonight on music, because I attended the Davies Choir concert in person, and it was really fun to do that. As Nikki said, we had the CEA meeting on the 15th. On the 16th, I attended Ndsba Lunch and Learn on behavioral health. Very interesting. It's always fun to be on the other side. I attended my own kids' teacher conference, and I echo that's just a remarkable thing, and it's so fun to be a part, see what's happening in the classroom. I also attended my own child's IEP meeting, and I'm continually blown away by the work that is done by the special ed programming in our district. It is really something to be commended. So huge kudos to the amount of time and energy and just heart that goes into that. And then I'll end on a very positive note. Next week is spring break-ish, I guess. That's our off year. But I am going with the Davies High School 5-day New York City drama Broadway tour trip. There's 27 of us total. It's all Davies Theater families. We are going to see 3 Broadway shows in New York City. We're going sightseeing. We're going to the Statue of Liberty and Empire State Building and Metro, Museum of Art, and many others. And then we, the theater students who are going, participate in audition workshops with actual Broadway actors. So I think that will be probably better than any spring break I've ever had. So, and I'm just a chaperone. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an awesome opportunity for the students, isn't it? Anne Marie sent out a calendar with dates coming up on it. I know we have some homework that came through email. We have some homework that is. What's that?
Did that doodle poll work?
I'm not sure what doodle poll you're referencing.
Okay. So, at any rate, we have a calendar that has been put together and sent out by Anne Marie. We have some homework that is coming up pretty soon that we need to be paying attention to. I was at the governance committee meeting and the CEA committee meeting. CEA at the most recent committee meeting finalized that we do want to go forward with some kind of an informational meeting for individuals that are interested in running for the school board so that they can learn a little bit more about the structure of the board and the roles and the responsibilities of a board member. And I don't have that date on me right now. I believe it's later in March. Anne Marie, do you happen to have it?
Tuesday, March 29th.
Tuesday, March 29th. Okay. So I believe also we discussed that we would like it for each committee to be able to be represented at that information session. So whether that's the committee chair or maybe a designee of the chair on that committee, I need to review the notes for that from that meeting. So to prepare for that event, the end of March. That information is on our website, I would imagine, Anne Marie. So individuals that are interested in running and learning more will be able to do so before the deadline of filing for running for office. So, Anne Marie, do we have a time on that?
5:30.
5:30, and I'll send some information out on that as well. So, I believe that is it for my report. Thank you all for sticking with us this evening here and the good, thorough conversation, and hope you guys have a good night and a safe trip home. Thank you. We're adjourned.